Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter. Originally launching in 1936, BBC Television was the leading broadcasting service for viewers in the UK for several decades. In the pre-satellite and digital age, with limited options to choose from, the corporation's name would quickly become well known to the British public. In the early 1950s, with murmurs of a new, commercial channel potentially launching to challenge the BBC, the corporation decided on a number of changes, both in programming, but also in appearance. And so, in late 1953, the first main BBC ident was to debut. So let's have a look at the batwings.
In our opinion, it is not suitable for children or for those of you who may have a nervous disposition.
Very atmospheric, to say the least. The batwings are instantly recognisable in terms of their design. The wings themselves feel very much from their era, something you could see on a B-movie poster of the day. The main intrigue, however, comes from the centre of the ident. Here we see a constantly rotating set of bits and pieces, all moving simultaneously, but also very soothing to witness. The two spiked arrows at the top and bottom of the circular section are quite odd in my opinion. They could be used to somehow stabilise everything, or are just an interesting design cue, but whilst I'm not 100% certain of them, I also couldn't imagine this early ident without them. Whilst today the batwings are considered to be an iconic piece of British television history, they weren't well received at the time. Some viewers either found them too terrifying or inappropriate to be broadcast. Remember, this was the 1950s, television was still fairly new, and many viewers were still apprehensive about the medium to begin with. To close off looking at this legendary sequence, here is what the BBC themselves claim the ident was meant to represent. The abstract pattern consists of two intersecting eyes, which scan the globe from north to south and east to west, symbolising vision and the power of vision. Flashes of lightning on either side represent electrical forces, and the whole form takes the shape of wings, which suggest the creative possibilities of television broadcasting. Whether you agree with them or not, that's up to you, but hey, that's what artistic interpretation is all about. Anyhow, let's move on to our next sequence today, which is titled The Map.
This is BBC Television.
Short, but sweet. Can't go wrong there. The map was introduced in 1962, after the corporation had rebranded itself from the BBC television service to the rather succinct BBC TV in 1960. This ident may seem infinitely simpler when compared to the batwings, and indeed it is. Nothing more than a map of the UK appearing before the BBC TV moniker, and nothing more. However, I would argue in terms of getting across the sense of the world, or the UK at least, this ident communicates that a lot clearer than the batwings ever did. It is clear that the ident is mainly focused on the UK specifically, rather than the whole world, but that global emphasis was to come very soon, as the map would only remain on TV screens for around 1 year. And then, in the autumn of 1963, the BBC introduced the first version of their iconic globe.
This is BBC Television.
There's the globe we all know and love. This ident is the first of what millions of viewers still identify the BBC with. The constantly rotating globe must have been seen as quite the achievement in 1963, as it was all done with live mechanics, and this practice would continue through the rest of the 60s and into the 70s. The shift is now on a global scale, with the rotating sphere now showing viewers every country and continent of the world, and implying that the BBC, despite being founded and primarily broadcasting in Britain, had something of a worldwide reputation and appeal. I personally much prefer the globe to the simple static UK map concept, and it seems that the masses and the BBC themselves felt the same, as this ident would be the first variant of the globe, and surprisingly, like the map before it, it would only last on screens for just a year. A bit less than that in fact. With BBC Two set to launch in the April of 1964, efforts were made to remove the TV part of the logo from the main channel's idents, and to refer to it in continuity announcements as BBC One. So, let's take a look at the first ident that implemented this change, the second variant of the globe.
This is BBC One.
Minor alterations, but the central concept remains. This time, the globe appears smaller, still revolving, but now with a thick black border around it. This remains within a white square, which itself is in a grey background. The BBC logo is present, now without the TV moniker, and it stands out much more strongly against the white background as opposed to its messy placement on top of the previous few sequences. Having said that, I personally find the first variant of the globe more interesting and iconic to view, but this one holds many of the strengths it has too. I just think the multiple layers are unnecessary. I can understand it was done to help certain features stand out, but it just seems like an overcompensation. Globe Mark II lasted a little longer than its predecessor, for around 2 years, and then, in 1966, a brand new addition was given to the globe. So let's have a look at the first variant of watch strap.
The next programme now on BBC Two is The Virginian. This is BBC One.
Quite different, but very striking. We've done away with the grey and white backgrounds, with black now being the predominant colour. The globe remains, now even smaller, still with its black border, but now seemingly part of a watch strap motif that shoots off to either sides of the screen. We get multiple shades on the straps, and I must say, it's quite a lovely image. Definitely my favourite of the monochrome idents so far. And I wouldn't mind if someone ever released this design as a watch itself. Now that would be novel. The BBC logo is still present, now rebranded to BBC One, and this is my favourite of the corporate logos that have popped up too. The BBC TV moniker is iconic in its own way, but the way this one looks, the way it's centred under the main feature of the globe, it all just looks great to look at. The first watch strap ident would last on screens for the next 2 years, and then, in 1968, the flagship channel's appearance was to change one last time before BBC One shifted into full-time colour broadcasting. So, let's now have a gander at the second variant of watch strap.
This is BBC One.
They had a good thing going and they ruined it. Focusing on positives first, this is still a very striking and eye-catching ident. The BBC One logo still stands out, as it arguably should, to notify viewers of the channel they're watching, but the globe remains small, and now without any sort of border, feels quite diminished and almost like an add-on feature rather than the main attraction. The watch strap is now one continuous line, and without the multiple shades it just feels a little bland and lacking, and the globe itself just looks very cheap. And don't get me wrong, this may well have been the same globe as before, or one made in the same vein, but without the borders or any sort of background, it just looks like something you could find or build in your own school. But even with this ident's misgivings, it would be the last BBC One ident to be made for the black and white era of British television, as just 1 year later, in 1969, a new ident would arrive, one that would aim to show off the benefits of colour TV. Overall, the monochrome idents from the 50s and 60s may seem really primitive by today's standards, but imagine how these must have come across at the time, a time when television was still a very new and unknown service. These varied and unique idents must have seemed like a gateway to a whole new world of entertainment. And to see BBC One evolve its appearance from the early 50s to the late 60s is equally fascinating. It created an unforgettable first visual identity before shifting to a specific concept for the 60s, and one which will carry for the remainder of the decade, and one in which it would retain for the next several decades. Will the BBC ever one day pay homage to these sequences by remaking them or reimagining them for the modern day? We'll just have to wait and see. From the early 50s with the mechanical batwings, to the now iconic globe motif of the late 60s, BBC One had truly cemented itself as not only the primary broadcaster in the UK, but also ingrained its image to millions of people all over the world. But in 1969, together in tandem with its main rival, ITV, BBC One would be moving to full-time colour broadcasting. With this change, it would need a brand new ident to showcase the new advancements to audiences. So let's have a look at our first ident today, which is the first variant of the colour globe.
Here on BBC One, 24 Hours with Kenneth Alsop.
Talk about a simple start. Like the black and white globes the BBC had been using for a decade, the new colour globe continues the tradition. We have the sphere rotating constantly, though this time we also have a mirrored effect. A curved mirror placed behind and around the globe create this quite surreal stretched out look at the world that we live on, now in full colour glory. I'm quite surprised, however, that considering this was the ident to launch the colour service, that the only real colour used is blue. A striking bright colour, of course, but I would have thought that multiple different colours would have been utilised to really show off the new look. However, keep in mind, by the start of the 1970s, less than 5% of UK TV licence holders owned a colour television set, with the majority still watching in black and white. When that's considered, the use of just a blue tone makes a lot more sense, as when viewed in black and white, the ident is still quite clear and striking for those watching in monochrome. This sequence would last for around 3 years, before receiving a slight alteration in 1972. So let's have a look at Mark II of the colour globe.
And now on BBC One, the first of this afternoon's programmes for children, Play School, introduced by Julie Stevens and Johnny Ball.
When I said there was a light alteration, I really meant it. The only real difference here is that the colour text has now been italicised, giving the ident a more sophisticated feel perhaps. Sometimes people fail to tell the two apart at a quick glance, and indeed, the overall sequence is exactly the same, but some viewers vastly prefer the new slanted look of the text. For me though, I kinda like the boldness of the first variant seen in 1969. It's striking, it stands out, and it clearly proclaims what it is and has to offer. This new version of the colour globe would be seen on screens until the very end of 1974, in which a few days before the new year, a brand new third variant of the colour globe was introduced to the viewing public. Let's have a look.
And the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be interviewed in the Tonight programme at 11:15 this evening. And now on BBC One, we're joining the Pink Panther.
Now, this is what I'm talking about. I think it's no exaggeration to say that if you ask people of a certain age to describe what BBC One looked like in the 70s, then this is the first image that they'll conjure. The overall concept once again remains the same, a rotating globe with a mirrored effect surrounding it, but now we've really expanded on the colour front. Mixed in with the warm navy blue is a gorgeous bright yellow, making up the countries of the world and indeed the mirrored effect. These two colours always blend well together. You see it work on everything from logos to fashion, and it also makes for a striking television image. The colour moniker has been removed, with just BBC One being the only text present, now in a huge, bold futurist style font. The ident indeed is very much no nonsense, showing viewers exactly what they need to see, the channel they're tuned into, and in a spectacular colour fashion. Whilst many millions of UK viewers were now watching in colour, there was still a significant amount who also watched in black and white still. And whilst the sequence does work in monochrome, I think you could argue that it was made to show off and cater to those gradually increasing colour viewers. And in 1976, just 2 years later, it would mark the first time that colour TV licences surpassed black and white ones, as all regions of the UK now had full access to colour broadcasting. The BBC had once again made its main TV channel instantly recognisable to everyone across the country, and this ident would be one of the longest running for BBC One, lasting 7 years up until 1981. And as the 80s really got going, it was time for one last version of the colour globe. So let's have a gander and see what changed.
This is BBC One. Good afternoon. In 2 minutes, the start of the new regular weekday news afternoon, presented by Richard Whitmore and Moira Stewart.
Small alterations, but nothing too major. This shift is definitely more noticeable than what we saw change in the early 70s. For one, the BBC One font has completely changed, going for a double line effect. Now, this logo had been seen countless times in the 1970s, though often restricted to trailers and continuity cards, rather than being featured on the main ident. However, with BBC Two adopting the same double line style in 1979, I suppose a sense of uniformity across channels became desirable by the corporation. The other main distinction is the palette swap from yellow to a shade of lime green. Whilst it does still blend and stand out, I've always thought that the look is a little subdued and certainly not as striking or as iconic as the previous ident. This would also be the last sequence to be operated on a mechanical basis and be filmed live, as by 1985, with digital technologies becoming gradually more accessible, BBC One would follow the examples of BBC Two, ITV and Channel 4 to give viewers its very first computer-generated ident, and that ident was conveniently titled The Computer Originated World.
Now, on BBC One, a brand new look to launch the early evening lineup. At 7 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, drama with the EastEnders. On Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, the live and lively entertainment is provided by Terry Wogan.
Talk about an upgrade. BBC One's first computer-created ident is certainly a stunner, and again, very synonymous with the channel in the 1980s. The mirrored effect, one that had surrounded the globe for over 15 years, was now gone. Instead, we were back to just a singular globe at the centre of the screen, rotating constantly, but now with a few changes. For one, instead of a yellow or lime green, the secondary colour was now a lovely gold finish, which had an air of not only sophistication, but importance too. The other main addition is a sort of see-through effect, where you can see the countries rotating in the background shaded in black, and then appearing before you in all of their gold finery. It really is a beautiful sequence and must have seemed quite the jump back in 1985. The BBC One logo has been changed also, gone are the double lines, and instead we are graced with a very slim, simpler font, but again one that gives off a sense of efficiency, style and finesse. It's absolutely one of, if not my favourite BBC One ident of all time, and that's saying something considering the sheer amount of sequences there are to choose from. The computer-originated world, or COW for short, would last into the 1990s, but after 6 years of service, it would be retired in early 1991, as the corporation decided to once again reinvent its look for a new decade. So as our final ident today, let's take a look at the virtual globe.
Satisfaction guaranteed, first star on BBC One, and we'll leave the introductions to someone else.
Folks, we are truly in the 1990s. When you break it down, the virtual globe isn't all too dissimilar than the cow ident that preceded it. However, this new ident arguably adds a lot more detail. This is partly due to the advancements made in digital technology, allowing designers to craft more in-depth designs for ident sequences. The globe is within a globe this time around, although arguably the globe itself isn't the main feature, as the numeral 1 is slapped on over it, taking up most of the visuals. The BBC corporate logo sits underneath, and whilst overall I do really like the design, I do think placing the 1 over the globe is a slight misfire. I enjoy seeing the globe rotate and seeing the small differences they implement this time, and it's not like they're impossible to see, but they are more obscured by this design choice. On the plus side, however, the mixture of red and blue hues is a wonderful choice, and the white shade of the 1 and the BBC logo again make the important factors stand out, letting viewers know within the first second just which channel they're tuned into. Whilst it may not be my favourite BBC One ident, it defined the channel for a generation back in the 90s, although it sadly wouldn't survive the entire decade. In 1997, the BBC underwent a huge corporate rebrand, not just with its TV channels, but across the entire corporation. Overall, the introduction of full-time colour television allowed the BBC to continue to create ever more elaborate and engaging idents for their audiences to view. From the humble simplicities of the very first mirrored globe in 1969 to the digital advances of the virtual globe in 1991, all of these idents at some point defined their generation, some in more impactful ways than others.
This is BBC Television.
For just shy of 35 years, television viewers in the UK would be greeted daily with a spinning globe, representing the flagship channel of the country's oldest broadcaster, the BBC. First appearing in 1963, the globe motif seen in BBC One's idents would become a key identifier for the Beeb in general. It would evolve with the times, such as the introduction of colour in 1969 and the implementation of computer-generated graphics in 1985. Whilst idents came and went on other channels, including those of the BBC, the globe on One always remained in some shape or form. By 1997, this was still the case. The virtual globe, which had been in use since 1991, had done a good job of taking BBC One's presentation into the 1990s. But as always, change was afoot. With the corporation rebranding itself completely, new idents would once again be needed, and rather than simply switch out one rotating globe in the middle of the screen for another, the BBC decided to make things bigger and grander in scale, taking the globe to the skies. On the morning of the 4th of October, 1997, viewers would turn on their TVs and be greeted with this.
Hello, very good morning and welcome to BBC One on Saturday the 4th of October with a brand new look.
This is the story behind the origins, impact and beauty of the BBC One balloons. The premise of the ident is remarkably simple. A balloon, made to look like a globe, flies throughout the skies across various iconic locations around the United Kingdom. Serene music and the calm voices of the various continuity announcers completing the feeling that these sequences were warm, inviting, and aimed to represent the BBC not just in Britain, but on the world stage. The globe motif had always been linked to the corporation's worldwide presence, reputation, and reach, and I would argue it's no more clearly demonstrated than via the BBC One balloon. Built by Cameron Balloons, this was not a miracle of CGI, for this was a real balloon, recorded in actual flight around the country, often from a helicopter positioned higher up. The designers behind the new ident package would be a name familiar throughout the industry, and to television enthusiasts such as you and me. The Lambinerne Design Agency, fronted by Martyn Lambinerne, were given the task once again of revamping a BBC channel, just as they had done so successfully with BBC Two back in 1991. This was the first time in BBC One's history that the ident was not comprised of merely a globe in the centre of the screen rotating around. However, the globe motif was kept, as it can be seen on the design of the balloon itself. The reason for this was described as being a visual metaphor underpinning the core thought, BBC One, bringing the whole world to every corner of the nation. It's not just the look of these idents that made them beautiful, but the music. The soundtrack heard across the set was largely composed of ambient music, composed by Phil Sawyer, formerly of the Spencer Davis Group. Amazingly, this was the first time that BBC One had implored a soundtrack for its idents since the 1950s, back when the batwings were torn to shreds by critics and members of the public.
Well, here is a letter to a newspaper from someone who lists the ideas that it suggested, this new symbol, to him, and they were menace, darkness, Germans, spiked helmet, bird of prey, baleful eye, cage, torture, bandaged heads, whips, thongs, aerial bombs, attacks, pincer movements, and fascist flashes. They really didn't like it, did they?
The music is fondly remembered by those who grew up with it, and even now, it's a charm to listen to, especially when doing some work, or in my case, some editing. When it comes to the visuals, the BBC One balloon is gorgeous enough, but it truly is the locations in which we see it that help complete the whole picture. Some of the locations seen in the original 1997 batch include the River Thames in London, Snowdonia National Park in Wales, Donnan Castle in the Scottish Highlands, and Grey Abbey in Northern Ireland. Whether you're familiar with these locations or not, the panoramic views from above you get thanks to the excellent cinematography really do lend a sense of scale that BBC One quite simply did not have before. In fact, it was something that arguably most terrestrial TV channels at the time lacked. They would have great idents, yes, but the vast majority felt small scale, whereas here we have the balloon flying across these sprawling landscapes, giving a sense of anything being possible. It marked a new phase for BBC One, just in time with the corporate rebrand at large, one that showed that the channel, and to some extent the BBC in general, was ready for the new millennium and the digital revolution that would follow in its wake. 1 year into their introduction, in 1998, new sequences featuring the BBC One balloon were shot. Once again, several locations around the different regions of the UK were chosen, including Blackpool Tower, the Brecon Beacons, and Giant's Causeway. Some sequences would see the balloon as a computer-generated image, but the vast majority still showcased the actual balloon in flight. The ident set continued to remain popular, that sense of vastness and yet calm resonating with millions up and down the country. There were several special idents that came about during the balloon era, but perhaps the most recognisable ones, and arguably the most popular, remain the ones designed for and shown at Christmas. The BBC One Christmas idents for 1997 and 1998 don't really feature the balloon, instead going for their own unique scenarios. The 1998 one especially evoking Christmas idents and the globe of old, via a giant red bauble. It wouldn't be until 1999 that the balloon would be incorporated properly into this festive televisual tradition. Just take a look. That definitely sends a Christmassy tingle down my spine. Not only is it fantastic to see the holographic Father Christmas, but it's lovely to see the red and orange balloon fly across the sky at night. The vast majority of main idents showed the balloon in the daytime, but to see it like this against a black and blue sky, I mean, if this doesn't scream beauty when it comes to presentation design, then I don't know what does.
The news now on BBC One with George Ekin.
The following year, the year 2000, we see the balloon at night again, the moon swamping it in the background, with Santa himself being the pilot dropping presents. This has to be one of the most whimsical and quite frankly magical Christmas idents that the BBC ever produced. The whole thing has an air of fantasy to it, like this could easily be the prelude to some kind of children's story that's about to be broadcast.
Spooky moments with a friendly ghost. Casper is the film on BBC One in 45 minutes. Before that, the reassuring sight of Christmas with the two Ronnies.
In 2001, the final Christmas that the balloons would take flight for, we see different objects in a home flying around on their own balloons, or relating to the schedules of the day. The main balloon itself is seen outside, but takes a more subdued role compared to the other festive sequences. Why this happened is arguably linked with what was going on with the main idents around the same time. The year 2000 marked more change to come for the BBC, with BBC One in particular facing the brunt of it. In an attempt to make the balloons feel more inclusive, lifestyle-based idents were introduced. These had more of a focus on people, showing us what they got up to in the various scenarios presented, whilst the balloon would be seen in more of a background role, flying past, still maintaining a presence, though no longer the primary focus. These newer idents aren't necessarily bad, but I do think it's a shame that the balloon, whilst present, isn't the sole focus. I feel with its design and just how eye-catching it is, blending the two elements doesn't really work as well as maybe once hoped.
And before Parky, the National Lottery Jet Set and Casualty, BBC One, on Saturday night.
In a way though, these later additions to the set would be frontrunners for the set that would replace the balloons. A set that was instigated by the brand new controller of BBC One, Lorraine Heggessey. One of her first actions as controller was to order a review into the branding of the flagship channel, believing in her view that the beloved balloon was slow and distant. I mean, balloons are arguably both of those things, but hey, here we are. Despite her distaste, the balloon would keep flying throughout the remainder of 2000, the whole of 2001, and into the beginning of 2002. Finally, towards the end of March that year, the BBC One balloon would take flight for the final time, before being permanently grounded after nearly 5 years of service.
The BBC One balloon, remember that, graced our television screens for half a decade, makes its final voyage tonight.
After enjoying a flight at the Bristol International Balloon Fiesta in the summer of 2002, the BBC One balloon was kept in storage across the UK for many years. Over 20 years later, seemingly out of nowhere, the balloon was tested and then flown once more in the June of 2023 at the Midlands Air Festival in Warwickshire. Hours of restoration were carried out to ensure that it looked its best for its first flight in over 20 years. And when the moment came, when you see it inflate, it's pretty magical to witness. The sheer positive responses that came from the BBC balloon being reinflated and flown speak for themselves. This piece of BBC One's iconography has stuck with people for nearly 3 decades. Whether you grew up watching it between 1997 and 2002, or saw it later, discovering it for the first time when researching television history, the BBC One balloon may not be heralded often as the greatest BBC One ident of all time, but I think, out of everything we've had from a channel that's been around in some shape or form for nearly 100 years, it's certainly the most beautiful. As the world was still getting used to the new millennium, the time would soon arrive that the UK's oldest channel, BBC One, would be gearing up for an identity rebrand. The then current balloons had been flying across the country's screen since 1997, but the latest set was lining up to be the most radically different and controversial idents for the channel yet. The globe motif, which had been the channel's key identifier since the 1960s, was finally set to be done away with. For the new set, dubbed the Rhythm and Movement idents, would have more of a focus on people and the various activities that they could engage in. So let's begin with the very first ident that was used to introduce the set, Capoeira. I'm sure that brought back a few memories for a lot of you. Capoeira was first seen on the 29th of March 2002. This was the first day in which the rhythm and movement idents would be seen, taking over from the balloons after nearly 5 years. Initially, there was some outcry from audiences regarding the absence of the globe. Whilst the balloons had focused more on the landscape seen around the UK, the globe had still featured, albeit in a smaller, more subtle way. Over time though, audiences would become accustomed to the new sequences, capoeira in particular. The notion of watching others perform activities is a concept that would later be used in the 2010s in the Oneness set, but I think the rhythm and movement bunch, noting capoeira in particular, pull off the concept in a better way.
Welcome to Good Friday morning and our brand new look on BBC One.
We see two artists engaging in capoeira, which is a Brazilian art form that combines elements of martial arts, dance, acrobatics, music and spirituality. Quite a melting pot of concepts there. It's quite a graceful and elegant thing to engage with, and as a viewer, part of that elegance carries across. The music chosen instantly adds to the visuals, creating a very calm tone that gears you up perfectly. Capoeira was often seen introducing the lunchtime news on weekdays, so the regular airings helped it become one of the more recognisable sequences in the entire rhythm and movement set.
Arsenal defender Ashley Cole looks forward to tomorrow's top-of-the-table Premiership clash with Chelsea in 10 minutes. That's in Football Focus on BBC One. After the news now with Matthew Amreliwala.
Whether you loved or hated the new look at the time back in 2002, capoeira I believe is the perfect way to introduce this concept to BBC One. It's not too loud or brash, instead taking things slow, using an interesting art form combined with appealing music to bring audiences into this new style of ident. After nearly 40 years of seeing a rotating globe of some kind, it was always going to take time for long-standing viewers to adjust, but thanks to sequences like capoeira, it would result in some of the most recognisable idents for the BBC in the early part of the 21st century. Shortly after the rhythm and movement idents debuted on the 29th of March 2002, audiences were keen to see the numerous different variations that this new concept would bring about. Most sequences tried to carry across an upbeat tone, with some of them filled with energy and vibrancy. However, ready to meet all occasions, BBC One would also have idents ready to reflect the more sombre times that the UK would go through during the early 2000s. So with that, let's head over to the Cornish coastline to take a look at ballet. Sombre, yes, but also really beautiful. The first thing I want to draw attention to is the location. The ident was filmed at the Minack Theatre in Cornwall, a stunning venue that sits right against the coastline. I've never been myself, but it's a venue I'd love to visit someday. When performing shows outside, exposed to all the elements nature has to offer, anything can happen, which only adds to the thrill of it all if you ask me. In the ident we see 10 ballerinas all dressed in bright red, performing a routine against the beautiful landscape. Not only is the ballet graceful to watch, but the musical accompaniment fits the piece perfectly. It's not overly bombastic, it's more relaxed yet filled with emotion. Fitting really, as ballet, or a still of it anyway, would be seen quite early on in the set's life, to mark what many deemed as a national tragedy.
Now on BBC One, a special BBC News with Peter Sissons.
The Queen Mother has died peacefully at the age of 101. The announcement from Buckingham Palace said the Queen was at her bedside.
One day after BBC One's new look debuted, on the 30th of March 2002, the Queen Mother passed away at the age of 101. Whenever a member of the royal family passes in the UK, everything grinds to a halt, whether you like it or not. I'm not a royalist, but I always sense the feeling of impact that an event like this can have on the nation. And even though it's just a still, it seems apt that ballet, out of all the rhythm and movement idents, be the one to mark this occasion. The sequence would seldom be seen on BBC One over the next 4 years, only really being used to mark moments of reflection. Examples of this included various funerals, such as those of footballer George Best and former Pope John Paul II. However, despite its relative scarcity amongst its peers, ballet would represent the whole rhythm and movement brand as it bid its last farewell. After 4.5 years representing BBC One, the rhythm and movement idents would bow out in the early hours of the 7th of October 2006. Just before the new circles were due to take over, a final montage of several sequences of the set was played. and what better way to close out that montage than to play ballet in full. Seeing these ballerinas perform their routine against the somber music for the last time is honestly moving in some respect. Whether you loved or hated the rhythm and movement set, for some audiences at least, particularly those of us who grew up in the early 2000s, this set was our introduction to BBC One and possibly terrestrial television as a whole. Ballet would become one of the most memorable and recognisable idents from the set, and I think over 20 years later, it holds up tremendously for its beauty, its simplicity, and the emotions it had the potential to conjure up. And for some viewers, it remains their favourite ident not just in this particular set, but for BBC One as a whole. But there were a couple more sequences that were introduced to the public on launch day. Keen to showcase the variety of activities seen in these new idents, and to further help people adjust to a globalist sequence, we'll observe one of these attempts, simply known as Acrobat. Now, that's the kind of physical strength I aspire to have. We observe 3 acrobats performing a routine, filmed inside of the Royal Horticultural Society halls in London. Colour scheme-wise, similar to ballet, red is the dominant colour. Fitting really, as this was the era in which the BBC really wanted to assign a different colour to its rapidly expanding roster of channels. So BBC 2 would take on purple, or yellow for the actual background, BBC 4 would be black, the upcoming BBC 3 would be a pale shade of blue, and for the flagship channel, BBC 1, red was chosen, a colour that the channel would be represented by for well over a decade. The beauty in this, and several idents in this set, is the artistry. To witness these acrobats move around utilising the aerial silks, the sheer body strength needed, it's very impressive and very engaging to watch.
This is E4.
Acrobat would often be seen before the news, its more lively soundtrack perhaps alerting audiences that their attention is required. If I could make any small nitpick, it would perhaps lie in the camera shots. The setup is a simple pull back and zoom out in order to fully see all 3 artists perform, but I think this could have gone one step further. After zooming out, why not begin to pan around the space, witness this performance from a variety of different angles? I truly think there would have been a way to do it without the sequence coming across as disorientating. But one aspect I cannot fault is the artists themselves. The 3 acrobats shown from left to right are Jane Osborne, Melissa Merrin, and Michelle Lane. Their choreographer was Roger Robinson of the renowned Acrobat Productions, and he himself helped develop the concept of the ident. Whilst we're on the designers, it's important to note that the entire rhythm and movement concept and idea was developed by design firm Lambie-Nairn. We're no strangers to Lambie-Nairn's work here, and Martyn Lambie-Nairn, despite being no longer with us, is still regarded as one of the most innovative and important ident designers of all time. And whilst the rhythm and movement set isn't viewed amongst the firm's best work, it seems that over the passage of time, more and more audiences have come to appreciate these sequences. Acrobat may not be the first ident you think of when it comes to this set, and indeed, it arguably isn't the most memorable. However, when you go back to watch it, it's almost impossible to not admire the sheer artistry being exhibited by these 3 acrobats, and I'm happy to say that it won't be the last time we see a group of individuals exhibit their talents in this way. We've already established from the first few idents of the rhythm and movement set that the BBC clearly wanted to focus on real people embracing and showcasing their talents and their interests. Athleticism and elegance have been the key elements we've noticed so far, and I'm happy to say that in both of those, that'll continue with this next sequence. It goes by several different names, but the one I've most commonly seen used to refer to it is hip-hop. Once you've heard that beat, that's not going to leave your head. We see the stage is set on a basketball court, which is fitting, as basketball is one of the many different names that this particular sequence goes by, showcasing some of the different moves that can be seen in the sport. It all blends together really well, if you ask me, The movements are nice and slick with the background beat, and it's visually appealing to watch from the start. I'd be foolish not to mention the hip-hop tune itself. It's very sanitised, very BBC version of hip-hop, and what I mean by that is, whilst the beat itself is strong, it lacks a lot of the oomph and hard edge that occupies some of the very best of hip-hop. But this was the early 2000s, and hip-hop itself was exploring a more relaxed vibe to some of its more mainstream sounds. But if anything, this is a catchy earworm if I ever heard one. One of the most recognisable soundtracks of the rhythm and movement set for sure.
Here on BBC One now, size matters for Lynn and Esther.
One key factor I want to chat about is the colour scheme. Red we've established is going to be the dominant colour across the entire set, and once again it's been used to great effect here. Whether it's the outfits of the players, or the wheels on their chairs, or even part of the court itself, its striking nature hasn't faded at all. Also, let's talk about the lead player in this sequence, renowned Paralympian Adi Adepitan. Not only was Adi a great inspiration in the athletics field, but to many, including myself, he was well known as being a television presenter. At that time, he was one of the people that fronted Exchange, a children's programme that mixed a game show format with factual entertainment. It ran from 2000 to 2006, and with over 2,000 episodes across its life, it's one of the most well-remembered from this time period of children's telly. Whilst Adi continues to inspire today, let's not forget that for 4 years, he appeared on viewers' screens almost every day, showcasing that just because you may face physical adversities, that doesn't mean you can't achieve something great. Hip-hop, or basketball, or wheelchairs, or whatever you know it by, continues to be one of the rhythm and movement idents that is most remembered 20 years on. For a set that was heavily criticised on its debut, I think idents like hip-hop absolutely champion the idea of showcasing people doing what they love or what they do best. And that absolutely applies to everyone, able-bodied or otherwise. And whether you like that beat in the background or admire the skill of these athletes doing their thing, it leaves a sequence that, whilst relatively simple in nature, comes across as uplifting and inspiring. To that effect, I'd argue that hip-hop remains one of the greatest triumphs of not just the rhythm and movement set, but for BBC One's idents as a whole. When people think back to the rhythm and movement idents, they think of the more slow-paced, serene sequences. Idents that are memorable in their own way, not needing to be loud or brash in their presentation. However, it is important to remember that this set did have idents that did exactly that. And today, we'll be diving into one of the most recognisable. So with that, let's head on down to the festival. Okay, so this one is interesting to analyse. The concept itself, of people dancing, isn't exactly new or groundbreaking. Variations have been seen on several different channels over the years, so we're not exactly innovating here. But where this ident supremely works, and for what it's most often remembered for, is for that sweet, sweet beat. BBC One was going for a semi-recurring musical motif during this era, arranged in different styles depending on the ident. This dance remix version perfectly encapsulates the kind of beats that were popular in the mainstream in the early 2000s. Dance music in particular was consistently evolving and enduring massive success, particularly at the clubs. Now, this is a festival, which makes me think a club setting would have been better to fit the music, but that's a minor nitpick. The music is fantastic, and even after 20 years, it's still great to hear. If only they'd expanded it into a full song and released it as a single. More on that later.
Here we go. Just one little point stands in our way. Gary Lineker introduces Match of the Day live now on BBC One. Come on, England.
However, despite my gushing over the soundtrack, for me, that's about the only element of the ident that truly works. Visually, all you have to witness is a huge crowd of people jumping up and down. Seriously, that's it. The camera pulls back so we can see just how many people are here, and the space used was quite large as this was filmed at RAF Bovington. Wonder what the active soldiers on duty thought of all this. Whilst the scope is impressive, people jumping up and down on a slowly widening camera shot loses its appeal quite quickly. Perhaps had we seen multiple angles, a look at what they were bopping to, focusing on different people, just anything, quite frankly. I honestly think why Festival, or Rave, as some know it by, has endured so well in people's minds, is due to how memorable the music was. Because really, you can't tell me you remember this ident for the visuals alone, right? The music is king, and it wouldn't just appear in this sequence.
fun with the little people meet the borrowers in half an hour on BBC One.
1 year after its debut in 2002, State One would take the jingle and incorporate it into one of their own tracks, Forever and a Day, which was released in 2003. Now, from what I understand, this tune didn't make it into the mainstream charts. However, like most dance-centric songs, it would find its way into clubs and gain a sort of cult popularity status. The sampling of the festival jingle is handled really well, blending seamlessly into the rest of the song. And when you hear it go off after listening to the build, like most good dance tracks, it's actually quite euphoric. Go and give it a listen if you're interested. Ultimately, whilst Festival did arguably give us the best sounding ident of the rhythm and movement set, I think overall in terms of its presentation, it just missed the mark. I get wanting to keep things simple and very self-explanatory, but I feel that could have been maintained easily with a few adjustments. Had this sequence not had the killer track behind it to back it up tremendously, I would be amazed if anyone could recall Festival or even hold it in their memory, as after 20 years, it stands as an example of whilst an ident can sound fantastic, it also has to have the visuals to truly make it a standout. The art of dance is a constant through the rhythm and movement set of idents. Already we've seen ballet dancers showcase their talents, and even the bouncing ravers exhibit a form of dancing in Festival. But today, we'll be taking a look at another dance-based sequence, one that utilises one of the most well-known and popular techniques out there. So without further ado, let's put on our dancing shoes and take the floor to the salsa. Very classy indeed. Now, just to get this out there right off the bat, I'm no dancer. I can act and sing, but when it comes to dancing, it's always remained my weakest performing skill. However, I can always appreciate good dancing, particularly when done in groups. Witnessing these various couples smoothly perform the salsa is a joy to watch, perfectly punctuated by the soundtrack. That recurring riff heard in a few of the rhythm and movement idents is heard again if you listen out for it, stylized to a more salsa-friendly beat. I have vague memories of this, so it could be false, but I seem to remember this sequence being used to introduce a programme that at the time was in its early years, but would go on to become the BBC's biggest Saturday night show, Strictly Come Dancing. But when you watch this sequence, doesn't that just make so much sense?
For better or for worse for wear, Dudley Moore's The Millionaire Who Needs a Wife. Arthur, the late film here in half an hour. First on BBC One, Comedy Connections to Butterflies.
In terms of filming, the location is Sarratt in Hertfordshire, in a rather gorgeously designed room. Aside from the appealing location, it incorporates the main red colour in a distinct yet subtle way, and one element I also love about the salsa ident is the different kinds of people we see performing the dance. The BBC should always be trying to showcase and represent all kinds of people in the UK, and whilst it continues to try and deliver that remit, it's nice to see that even 20 years ago in 2002, when diversity wasn't as well championed, we see so many different kinds of people in the sequence. It would have been nice perhaps if the camera had focused on each couple individually, rather than pan out to show a group, just so everyone would get a chance in the spotlight. But in terms of what we have, seeing different kinds of people as opposed to just a singular couple is a strong plus in my eyes. Like many of its peers, salsa would continue to air sporadically on BBC One until late 2006, when the rhythm and movement idents were replaced entirely. I'd argue that it remains an ident that isn't often talked about from this set, as like many of them, on the surface it seems incredibly simple without much to delve into. But from the great soundtrack to the smooth technique of the couples dancing, to the variety of people, there's just more here than you'd first think. An underrated ident in what continues to be an underrated set. Sports have been a key part of BBC One's lineup since the black and white days of television. Whether you love it or hate it, there's always a huge demand from viewers to be able to watch their favourite sport on the TV, should they not be able to go to a game in person. Rugby is undoubtedly one of the biggest sports we enjoy here in the UK, so when it came time to create idents around the concept of rhythm and movement, the game of rugby has one element that would, in theory, fit perfectly with this remit. So let's take a look at the haka.
Rivalries don't come much bigger than this. Now on BBC One, Gary Lineker introduces uninterrupted action from the match of the day, live.
Ah, cracking stuff. For those unfamiliar, the haka originates from Maori culture, being a traditional dance for the indigenous Polynesian people of New Zealand. It utilises your hands, feet, legs, body, voice, and even your tongue and your eyes. If you ever catch New Zealand playing rugby, the All Blacks will perform the dance before every game. Fitting then that where we start camera-wise is on a Maori native, Joe Hutley. He leads the dance while surrounded by several amateur Welsh rugby players, who join him in the haka. The dance itself I've always found really fascinating to watch. The intensity of the movements and sounds comes across as something truly quite powerful, and that's no exception here. However, this ident isn't without its faults.
Tom Cruise to the rescue now on BBC One Wales, and Mission Impossible includes strobing effects in the opening title sequence.
When it comes to TV idents, I've always been a big believer of synergy between audio and visual, that you can have the greatest looking or most interesting concept for your sequence going, but if the soundtrack used doesn't back it up, then it arguably doesn't reach its full potential. To me, that's exactly what happened here with Haka. Given that the dance itself is so loud and complex and intricate, known to audiences for building up to the start of a rugby game, it's a surprise to hear that the soundtrack doesn't match that. Instead, we get a string arrangement, one which does use the recurring theme heard across the rhythm and movement idents, and in fact sounds more like an upbeat version of the ballet sequence. And as nice as it may sound, I'd argue that it just doesn't fit at all with the haka concept. I feel the music needed to be louder, more bombastic, more fitting for how general audiences often see the haka to be performed. You could argue the idyllic Welsh setting warrants a more serene soundscape, but I disagree.
A collection of pottery and ceramics that's just too big. It's gotta go. Cash in the Attic hopes to sell it on for a bob or two in 25 minutes. After Neighbours.
Haka was seen amongst the launch batch in March of 2002 and was sporadically seen over the next few years, appropriately utilised to introduce sport-based programming. However, Haka has the distinction of being one of only 2 idents from the rhythm and movement set to be removed from broadcast circulation before the set's retirement as a whole. This happened sometime around 2005 and was reportedly down to issues with music licensing. Rather than remove the ident entirely, I would have seen this all the more reason to produce a new score, one that arguably better reflects the haka and how it's presented. Sadly, when a final montage of rhythm and movement idents was shown in late 2006, haka was not present among them. 20 years since its debut, haka remains one of the sequences from this set that rarely gets spoken about, aside from it being removed from the airwaves. Whilst I think the central concept is a striking one that is a great showcase for other cultures on TV, the lack of appropriate music just totally ruins the potential for me. Some will like it as is, which is totally fine of course, but I've always viewed haka as one of the greatest missed opportunities of the rhythm and movement set, one that with a few tweaks here or there, could have become one of the most recognisable and most popular. Regarding different styles of dance, we've experienced several varieties in the rhythm and movement set so far, including ballet and salsa, but one avenue of dance that I personally love is tap. Tap dancing is an art that, when performed with the right skill, accuracy and attention to detail, can create a piece that's truly stunning to watch or even perform. With that gushing praise for the art form, let's settle back and watch the Tap Dogs. One of my absolute favourites, no lie. We see a troupe of dancers tap around an industrial-based location, their feet perfectly tapping in time with the music, which for those eagle-eared listeners will recognise that familiar refrain heard throughout this set as a whole. Where do I even begin with this beauty? The obvious main positive has got to be the dancing itself. These guys are professionals, and the way they move not just with their feet, but their bodies in tandem as well, with all the actions that come from it, is just stellar to watch. The red clothing they wear continues the emphasis on the colour red for BBC One, and the artistry extends up from the floor. Towards the end, you can see some of the dancers ascend several ladders, and then begin to tap on them. To do that precisely, whilst being up at a height, now that can take some skill. The location in which the Tap Dogs are performing as mentioned works perfectly. The location itself is actually Littlebrook Power Station in Dartford, Kent. Now, I'm no architect, but I've often found these huge industrial complexes such as power stations to be absolutely fascinating in their intricate design. How these guys utilise and interact with their surroundings, the ladders and so on, really emphasises the tap dancing for which they excel at. I wish more idents generally did something like this, focusing on people interacting with seemingly ordinary or mundane surroundings in a fun and unique way. Tap dogs would be seen often, but I remember seeing it the most on Saturday nights, before a certain sci-fi show, which itself had been back after a very long break.
Well, now BBC One hurtles through space and time. Come with us for the trip of a lifetime. Aliens, you have been warned. Christopher Eccleston is the new Doctor Who.
That's right, folks. On the night of Doctor Who's return on the 26th of March 2005, the ident to lead us directly into the episode titled Rose was presented to us by the Tap Dogs. And to be honest, when thinking about the rest of the rhythm and movement idents, I think using this one to bring back Doctor Who is a great choice. Others could have done it for sure, but I think this one just builds that excitement, gets your interest, and lets you know that no matter what the programme, you should be in for a good time. Having been a mainstay on BBC One for 4 years, the Tap Dogs showcased their last dance on the 7th of October 2006, when they featured as part of a montage looking back at all the different sequences that embodied rhythm and movement. As previously mentioned, Tap Dogs has always been one of my favourites, certainly when I was a kid. And as an adult, it remains an absolute belter of an ident. The sheer energy that the performers exude whilst dancing, the excellent location choice, the way the environment is used is just brilliant. Definitely one of the best dance-based idents we've seen on TV over the last 20 years. Ever since the birth of stations like MTV in the early 1980s, music videos have formed an integral part of being a performer within the mainstream music industry. From early groundbreakers to the short films that occupy new songs today, despite perhaps not being as impactful nowadays, everyone has at least one music video that they know and love. And with that, let's delve into BBC One's attempt that first appeared on TV screens in late 2002.
Romance is in the air tonight as Minty finally makes his move on Emma. EastEnders, just half an hour away, here on BBC One.
Have you ever seen a more 2000s thing in your life? Music video was the first ident in the rhythm and movement set that didn't debut on launch day. Instead, it would debut just over 6 months later, on the 4th of October 2002. If you thought Red was incorporated subtly in other sequences, it's full on here. We see 7 dancers strut their stuff against a predominantly red backdrop, which does look great, with a bit of extra movement, which was a common occurrence in music videos of the era. To further discuss the look of the ident, the outfits the dancers are wearing, as well as the moves they're making, would absolutely feel right at home of the most popular artists of the day, including performers such as Britney Spears. The choreography is smooth but also feels very coordinated and precise, which again was seen by a lot of popular singers and groups. If you could mimic the dance steps, then that was often the sign of a good music video. Whilst I dig the whole aesthetic and admire the BBC actually being able to capture the vibes of the day visually, I do have my issues with the music itself. It does incorporate the recurring refrain of this era, which is a nice touch, but it's now presented in this electronic sounding mix, but it just sounds so strained and tinny. This sort of minimalistic sound did have its place in the mainstream during the early 2000s, with sparser beats being backed up by some insane lyrical bars. But given that this is just an instrumental, I think to truly enhance and complement the choreography, I feel the sound should have been a lot bigger, fuller, and perhaps embrace the more bombastic sounding pop tunes that were storming the charts. It's not a bad beat, but I just feel it's missing its oomph. It doesn't pack a punch, whereas the dancers do. So again, it doesn't quite meet my belief in synergy. The visuals are great, stunning in fact, some of the best of the set, but the audio that accompanies it doesn't quite hit the same note for me. As mentioned, music video was the first rhythm and movement ident to debut after launch day, but this new ident was partly inspired and designed for a very specific program that was to debut on viewers' screens. If you don't know which program I'm talking about, if you were around in the early 2000s, you're about to get a flooding of memories. That's right, music video was the sequence that led directly into Fame Academy. Inspired by the performing school from the 1980 film of the same name, this new program was a bit of a hit in its day, particularly those of us who avidly tuned in week after week to watch it. So, if music video is remembered for just one thing, why not for the early 2000s genius of Fame Academy? It's great to see that music video wasn't only a limited edition ident commissioned for a specific programme, but one that would become part of the main lineup. Like the rest of the set, it would last be seen in the early hours of the 7th of October 2006 via a tribute-style montage. Over the years, music video I feel has gotten much more appreciation and discussion attributed to it. Whilst the concept is simple, I think the strong visual look, one which shares so many similarities with short films of the day, really helped it feel like a relatable sequence to those watching. This could have easily been part of a pop star's video, and I'd be so keen to see the BBC try something like this again sometime. Music videos have changed radically over the past 20 years, but even if a new attempt was made, you can never forget the original. Prior to the 2000s, most BBC idents mainly comprised of showcasing the symbol of the channel, with a bit of this and that around it. My point being that real people were never really a feature. The closest we came was with the balloon idents of 1997, and whilst real-life locations were shown across the UK, real people remained absent. And with the rhythm and movement set placing real people at the heart and centre of it all, it's been great to see different kinds of people and cultures be represented. And that trend continues today as we look at Bollywood. Another nostalgia trip for me here. As the name would suggest, this ident embodies some of the key elements seen in the division of Indian cinema known as Bollywood. For those who don't know, India produces the most feature films in the world, with Bollywood being one of its most productive and lucrative when it comes to the box office. Whilst films of this category come in all shapes and sizes, the incorporation of music and dance is a mainstay in many of these films. As such, we see 9 male and 9 female dancers moving together in the centre in perfect harmony. One key element I like though is that the familiar red of the set is contrasted well with the bright white of the men's outfits. Seeing both colours move and blend together is really nice, and with these dancers being experts in their crafts, it makes the whole thing all the more appealing. More dancers join the fray as the camera pulls out, revealing the landscape in which this ident is set. I'll touch more on that in just a second.
An intimate performance from one of the world's biggest music stars tomorrow night on BBC One, Elton John, in session at 10:35.
Bollywood was first seen on TV screens in November of 2002, so quite some time after the rhythm and movement idents debuted. I can't find any information indicating that it was to promote a specific programme, but similar to Tap Dogs, I remember seeing Bollywood quite frequently on Saturdays, often before what would become the Beeb's biggest show of the weekend, Strictly Come Dancing. With dance being such a key element of the ident set, Bollywood felt and still feels like a natural fit amongst the bunch, giving Indian culture the chance to take centre stage and in spectacular fashion. The music thankfully matches the visuals, with the soundscape sounding very akin to what you'd hear in a Bollywood film, particularly during the musical numbers. However, despite all the praise I've heaped on so far, I do have one main criticism to share. As the camera pulls back, we can see that the set that's been put up again reflects a location that you'd see within India itself, with a red backdrop taking up most of the screen space. Whilst honouring the Indian culture is appreciated, I don't see why an ident like this couldn't have actually been filmed in India. Now, I have no idea what the budgets were for things like this, but given that the BBC has various teams stationed around the world, I'd like to think that even in 2002, it wouldn't have been impossible for a small crew to film some dancers amongst an iconic Indian landmark at the very least. I know red is the main colour for the set, but to me, that big backdrop we see by the end is just a bit of overkill. Despite my issues with the set, the main element, the dancing, works superbly. Like the other dance-based sequences we've looked at so far, the precision and passion of the dancers bursts through the screen, and really makes the whole ident feel that much more appealing and watchable. Indian culture, including Bollywood, is very fascinating to delve into, and it makes me wish that each ident from Rhythm and Movement could have focused on a different culture from different countries. But as it stands, Bollywood remains a nice window into one of India's biggest successes in the entertainment industry. What better way to exemplify rhythm and movement than via the medium of dance? Ballet, salsa, or the slick choreography of a music video are just a few examples that we've viewed so far. But now we head back to the ballroom to take a look at another favourite technique amongst the Strictly crowd, the tango.
Join Boise and Marlene down on the farm with the green grass at 8:30.
Very eloquent indeed. The setting for this ident is Leadenhall Market, located in the City of London. Here we see a trio of couples take to the streets to dance a tango, supposedly under the element of pouring rain. Right from the get-go, we can see the common themes of this ident set carry on over to this sequence as well, namely the predominance of red in the colour scheme and the incorporation of the recurring musical motif. Although admittedly this time it's a lot more subtle, more suited to a tango absolutely, but perhaps not as obvious to the ear as some of the other variants. But outside of this visual and audio constant, the major factor to always look at with an ident like this is the dancing itself. The trio of couples we see dance execute the moves superbly, just as the other artists did in their respective idents. I can't see as much variety in the people themselves compared to a sequence like Salsa, but ultimately, if they had filled these streets with couples, combined with the scenery, it may have felt a little bit overcrowded. I like that the camera showcases all three, but in a similar critique to some of the other dance idents, I wish the camera would move around the different couples individually, focusing on how each of them expresses themselves differently. The tango, as with most dance techniques, has familiar moves, but they can be showcased in a whole number of ways, and being able to view each one individually would have been great, but as it stands, darting your eyes between the three of them isn't too disorientating. Tango first debuted in the first few days of 2003, gradually expanding the lineup of the rhythm and movement set as a whole. Like many of its peers, it wasn't tied to introducing one specific program, but like with several other dance idents, it was an easy pick to usher in a show such as Strictly Come Dancing. I remember seeing it on Saturdays, whether that was before Doctor Who, Casualty, or some other program on the weekend lineup. It was able to last all the way up until the Circle idents took over in October of 2006, but in the near 20 years since its debut, is it well remembered? With so many dance-based idents to arise from this era, it's understandable that some of them could get lost in the memories of viewers. From who I've talked to, people remember this one quite well, alongside other sequences like Tap Dogs for example. For me, it's not my favourite of the dance idents seen on BBC One at this time, but it certainly isn't a failure. If anything, it lives up to the remit of the concept, to display ordinary people exhibiting rhythm and movement in a whole variety of different styles. The rhythm and movement set of idents is stacked with variety, with skills such as dance taking a big presence. However, martial arts has also played a part in the set, including the very first sequence to debut in this era, Capoeira. And now we have another interesting martial art to delve into, one which has its core principles in self-defense, as well as meditation. So with that, let's have a look at Tai Chi. Wondrously peaceful, wouldn't you say? We see a group of Tai Chi practitioners going over their craft in an idyllic setting. The setting in question is actually located in Scotland, near Loch Rannoch. Scotland has some beautiful natural locations, so choosing one such as this to showcase an art form that has such a strong basis in meditation is a perfect fit. The group are led here by Ian Cameron, himself an Edinburgh-based instructor, with the variant of Tai Chi being based in the traditional Wudang system, originating from China. It truly is an interesting martial art to witness, and when set in such a location, it really makes for a soothing and comforting ident.
Here on BBC One now, they tell it like it is.
In regards to how Tai Chi fits in with the rhythm and movement set as a whole, it holds many of the similarities of its peers. For example, the musical riff of this era is heard, but presented in a more oriental style, meeting the calm reflective nature of the visuals that we see. Red once again is front and centre colour-wise, predominantly in the practitioners' uniforms. Now, Tai Chi was first seen in the June of 2003, however it remains one of the few rhythm and movement idents to actually get a second variant. So let's have a quick look at that one. Such a small change, but I really like this. This variant starts out the same, before the camera perspective is flipped around, so that we, the audience, are actually viewing them practice via the reflection in the lake. It truly looks beautiful to see this perspective showcased, further boosted by the great setting and soundtrack. I actually think I prefer this version ever so slightly more than the original, which is a great shame in a way, as the second variant of Tai Chi was only on screens for a matter of months before it was withdrawn from the airwaves. There isn't much information available as to why this was the case, but the first variant is the sequence that got the most airplay, lasting all the way up until the changing of BBC One's idents in late 2006. The legacy of the Tai Chi ident may be based in how its second variant was a rarity for the time and for its brevity on the airwaves, but I think it should gain much more credit than it gets. Tai Chi was often played right before news broadcasts, which is fitting really. The news can so often be filled with hard-hitting or somber stories from around the world, and having an ident like this which is calm, soothing, relaxing, and even occupies a more meditational feeling, just like the art form it's showcasing. It's in some ways the perfect way to ease people into a news broadcast. It may not get much discussion these days compared to some of its peers from the era, but for me, Tai Chi remains one of the most underrated BBC idents of the early 2000s. The BBC has always had a daunting task of trying to appeal and meet the needs of all kinds of people, across all ages, all races, and so on. It doesn't always hit the mark, but the rhythm and movement idents I've always felt were a good attempt at getting some variety into BBC One's identity. We've seen a whole host of people showcase different skills and activities, and that trend continues in today's feature, where on a shipyard, we'll observe the talents of the skateboarders. Rather more serene than I was expecting. I think anyone could be forgiven for thinking that this ident would be a lot more action-packed, loud and bombastic, but I really enjoyed the fact that it subverts that expectation. Instead, we see a trio of skateboarders gracefully gliding through a shipyard, expertly demonstrating their skills, and trust me, I've tried skateboarding and it can be difficult to master. The location itself is the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and what a great location it turned out to be. Similar to Tap Dogs, we get a chance to see these guys manipulate the environment to their advantage. A shipyard may not be the first place you think of when it comes to skateboarding, but when you see these three perform their tricks with such fluidity and ease, it becomes a no-brainer.
So, which Maria should be tied up with string? Keep voting for who you want to save, and Ronan Keating joins Graham with the results show at 9:25 here on BBC One.
The three skateboarders in question are actually professionals within the field, that being Ollie Todd, Franklin Stevens and Danny Wainwright. I remember when growing up in this era that skateboarding was sort of going through a cultural boom once again during the early 2000s, and seeing sequences like this on the telly, I'm sure, would have inspired people of all ages to give it a try for themselves. It was first seen in the September of 2003, releasing as another new addition to the rhythm and movement lineup. One element that really complements the more laid-back tone is the music. It's a soothing piano arrangement of the now familiar jingle we keep hearing in the set, and it blends so well with the visuals that it remains one of my favourites of the entire batch. And given that it contained a calming, slightly somber soundtrack, you'd often end up catching skateboarders before news broadcasts, as well as at the end of the CBBC strand when it was still broadcast as part of BBC One. Given that this ident was filmed in Northern Ireland, it's unsurprising that throughout its lifetime, it received a ton of airplay within that region. It also had a special alteration made for it for a couple of broadcasts in 2005. Unfortunately, we don't have any footage, but I can describe it as best I can. After defeating England 1-0 in a qualifying match for the 2006 World Cup, the BBC One Northern Ireland logo was changed from red to green. A new square appeared in the opposite corner, displaying an English flag, and the word displayed within it was nil. Nice way to celebrate your victory, if you ask me. Upon the retirement of the rhythm and movement set in late 2006, in the Northern Ireland region, skateboarders was the last ident to be showcased, thanks once again to the fact that the location of the sequence was shot in Belfast. Fitting in a way, and fascinating to see how one particular ident within a big set could form such a special bond with one of the 4 regions of the UK. Skateboarders to me represents every element that works in the rhythm and movement set. It has some stunning visuals, not just in terms of location, but in terms of the people displayed. The skateboarders are effortless in their execution, and combined with the gorgeously simple music, creates one of the greatest audio-visual blends of the early 2000s, in terms of TV idents. Skateboarding has popped up briefly in BBC One since, including in their latest lens backstrap sequences, but for me and many others it will always be the 2003 original that showcased the best demonstration of the sport. And who knows, maybe one day it will return, or be expanded upon, to create something even greater. As the 21st century arrived, the world was beginning to feel more accessible to the everyday person, maybe not necessarily in the physical sense, but certainly in terms of online. The internet allowed the world to be looked at in a new way, with millions discovering new places and people via the World Wide Web. However, traditional television continued to deliver on that remit as well, particularly with the BBC. The rhythm and movement idents already have showcased a willingness to display people of all kinds and cultures, and that is exemplified by our ident today. So let's have a look at Maasai. Really fascinating stuff. The Maasai are a tribe located in parts of Kenya and Tanzania, with a population of roughly 2 million. One of the most standout features for which they are known for are for their unique customs and dress, which is brimming with detail if you use an eagle eye. Appropriately, this ident features native Maasai members on location in the African savannah, another opportunity for BBC One to showcase not just the UK, but different parts of the world. I could definitely see this being used as part of the BBC World Service, a vital component of the corporation, particularly for English speakers living abroad.
Now, BBC One's up for a glorious afternoon live at Wimbledon with Super.
Maasai was introduced halfway through the lifespan of the rhythm and movement idents, first debuting on the 5th of January 2004. It was the only new ident for the set that year, and would remain the sole ident of this particular era to be filmed outside of the UK. As mentioned in the Bollywood instalment, it's a shame that more international filming wasn't able to occur, as a truly world-based perspective reflected in idents is a tantalising concept indeed. Like say if Bollywood had been filmed in India, or Hacker filmed in New Zealand, that could have been fantastic. But I'm glad that even though it's the only one, Maasai got the chance not only to show off a different culture to millions, but it was able to do so amongst the African landscape.
Disturbing the past and unleashing the ancient forces of evil now on BBC One, Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz have woken the mummy.
Unlike some of its peers, Maasai doesn't get much of a mention when discussing the rhythm and movement idents. Perhaps it was down to appearing halfway through the set's life, or by some viewing it as uninteresting. But even though we see the Maasai people here jump up and down, there is more to dissect. The music is a percussion-based version of the jingle used by BBC One, and gels really well in my view with the visuals and the setting. It may not have a great deal going on compared to some other sequences, but in my view it achieves the remit of both the set and the BBC as a whole, to provide a service at home, but also abroad, to introduce audiences to concepts they aren't familiar with, to show them different lifestyles and cultures, and hopefully, they'll learn something. I highly recommend you read more about the Maasai tribe. I mean, you can really fall down a rabbit hole with how much there is to know about them. It may not be the most remembered, but I feel it slots in nicely with the vibe and feel that the rhythm and movement ident sets out to create. The rhythm and movement idents were unusual for 21st century television, in that they didn't have many special variants in their set tied to specific events or programmes. There are some, and we'll get to those, but in terms of the main sequences, after the initial launch in 2002, the addition of new idents happens at a slow pace. In 2005, the last regularly seen sequence would be added to the lineup, so let's witness the flexibility of the tumblers. If I'm honest, I've got mixed feelings on this one. To start with the positives, the display of athleticism from these guys is incredible. Watching them flip and fly around this setting is great, and is very reminiscent to me of what we saw with the skateboarders over in Northern Ireland. The camera is constantly moving, which creates a good sense of motion and flow, and the colour red remains present to keep a sense of familiarity with the set at large. It was also filmed at Pebble Mill Studios, once a key hub for the Beeb, though it has since been demolished. However, I do have some criticism of Tumblr, the key one I want to address being the music.
An Oscar winner for BBC One Northern Ireland tomorrow night, and one of Francis Ford Coppola's very best. Gene Hackman stars in The Conversation at 12:05. Into the midnight hour now with violence, sex and strong language. Tom Berenger's the detective, falling for a witness to murder.
The soundtrack we hear incorporates the familiar BBC One jingle of the era, mainly using a sort of synthesized brass to keep it all together. Whilst on a base level it fits with the visuals that we see, the music, to me at least, sounds rather abrasive and a bit unfeeling in terms of how harsh it is. It's not unlistenable by any stretch, but let me put it this way, there are far better soundtracks from this ident set alone that could have been used in place of this. It may come as no surprise then that when this ident first hit the airwaves in early 2005, a completely different soundscape was heard entirely. Now, doesn't that sound a whole lot better? This more urban hip-hop sounding beat was the initial soundtrack for Tumblr, and was indeed heard on the ident's first broadcast. However, due to a copyright dispute regarding the track, after just 24 hours, Tumblr was given a new piece of music, which is what we heard earlier. I understand that replacing it was unavoidable, but the funkier, edgier soundings of the original fit so much better than the brass sounds of the replacement, at least to my ears. It's all subjective. Oddly though, the original music was heard for the remainder of the Rhythm and Movement set's life, though only if you were watching BBC One Scotland. As idents go, I enjoy Tumblr in the same way I enjoy several sequences from this set. It demonstrates people showing off their talents and skills in a very appealing and exciting way, though I feel compared to something like Skateboarders or even Tap Dogs, it's just missing that little bit of extra that makes it magic. The revamped soundtrack definitely hinders this one for me, and having debuted in 2005, it barely got much time to cement itself amongst its peers, many of which had first been introduced back in 2002. So whilst it may not be my favourite, I'm sure there's some of you who adore it, and if there's one thing we can't dispute, it's the tumbling itself. Another great rhythmical showcase of what this ident set was all about. The BBC has had a long tradition of adapting or inventing brand new special idents to mark the Christmas period. Ever since the late 60s, their flagship channel, BBC One, always had a unique sequence every year, most of which have gone on to become well known and regarded in their own right. When the Rhythm and Movement idents became the channel's representative identity in 2002, it was only natural that the Christmas tradition would continue, but it wasn't without its controversies. So let's sit by the fire with a warm brew and have a look at Snowflakes, the ident that represented BBC One, celebrating Christmas in 2002 and 2003. Well, isn't this wholesome? We see a series of children dressed as snowflakes fall from the sky to a snow-laden earth before running about against a red sky. A nice touch, as we firmly established red is the dominant colour. By coincidence or by design, it also happens to be one of the main colours associated with Christmas. It stands out for sure, but when contrasted with the snowy landscape that these kids are in, it feels less jolly and a bit more doom-laden. The music though helps to alleviate this feeling, comprised of an upbeat series of jingles and sounds that are present in many a Christmas tune. In terms of using the children to front an ident, some may criticise it, but I think it fits with the ethos of the Rhythm and Movement set. They may not be showcasing a specific skill, but the joy in their movement fits perfectly for Christmas, and it shows that BBC One is comfortable with showing all kinds of people, whether they be children or grown-ups.
BBC BBC One turning up the heat. George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez just can't fight their attraction with violence and very strong language. Out of sight.
In terms of the long history of Christmas sequences that BBC One has had over the years, it isn't one of my all-time favourites, and for many, it bears a sour taste, as in 2003, it caused some minor, perhaps overblown controversy. As mentioned, BBC One would showcase a brand new ident every Christmas, and it had been that way for decades. However, after initially being used for the Christmas season of 2002, Snowflakes was reused a year later, in 2003, the first time that this had happened on the Beeb's flagship channel. Some members of the public complained to the corporation, because if the British are sticklers for anything, it's tradition, and the tradition of a new ident at Christmas had been shattered. Of course, nowadays it's not so much of an issue, as idents of all kinds are reused constantly across different channels, but for a short time in 2003, these snowflake-looking children were not in the hearts of every viewer.
Parkinson at Christmas is tonight at 10:15. Now, back to ancient Egypt for a magical adventure. It could be a bit scary for younger kids, so get ready to hide behind the sofa as BBC One unleashes The Mummy.
Being that Snowflakes was the first Christmas ident of the Rhythm and Movement set, in many ways it feels like it was trying to work itself out. Keep in mind that the set as a whole was seen as a radical departure for BBC One at the time, and with more emphasis on people as opposed to a globe or a similar symbol. As such, it may not be the best Christmas ident the corporation has ever created, but like anything, it had to start somewhere. The real test, especially after the hoo-ha caused by reusing it in 2003, would be to see if an eventual new ident for Christmas could restore that goodwill. We've established that the Rhythm and Movement idents got off to a rather rocky start when it came to Christmas. The snowflakes were cute, but it wasn't one of the all-time greats, and given that it was the first festive ident that BBC One reused the following year, it's never sat too well with those who take an interest in these things. So for 2004, a new ident was commissioned, so let's see if it could win back the favour of certain members of the public, as we took in to some Christmas pudding. Similar, yet an improvement in my eyes. Before we go through this in depth, it's important to note how this ident came to be. The concept and design actually was born from a competition run on popular children's magazine programme Blue Peter. The presenters tasked their viewers with the chance to design the festive ident, the winning selection being the one that would represent BBC One for the 2004 Christmas season. And it seems that inspiration was drawn from the first festive sequence from the Rhythm and Movement set. Children are the stars once again, though rather than dressed up as snowflakes, they're dressed in more generic Christmassy attire, bouncing around on Christmas puddings as if they're space hoppers. And to be honest, that's a pretty good idea.
So first on BBC One, it's a fight for survival as the staff of Casualty and Holby come together in the aftermath of the Boxing Day hospital disaster.
Another improvement I like with the 2004 variant is the set design. We're still amidst a predominantly snowy white landscape, which remains an appropriate choice of course, but the main point I'm glad they altered was the sky. In the 2002-3 sequence, the red tone of the sky made it look a lot more like an apocalypse as opposed to Christmas. Whereas this time, it's been softened somewhat, making it look more like a calming winter sky heading into the sunset, which definitely generates the warm fuzzy feeling of Christmas. Also, the red of the kids' outfits is more than enough to continue the colour theme of the ident set as a whole, and the contrasting green and brown tones of the pudding further help make this one of the most visually appealing idents of the Rhythm and Movement set.
It's going to be a blue Christmas.
The music to this one remains very similar to what we heard the previous year. Something upbeat, jolly, and very, very Christmassy. I'm a bit more lenient on soundtracks for Christmas idents, because wanting to generate a festive feeling is understandable, but it's nice to hear something a bit different every once in a while. Overall, I hope whoever won that Blue Peter competition is proud of their winning design. For me, it marks a major step up from the snowflakes, but also retains a sense of continuity, establishing that for the Rhythm and Movement idents, the people that would be showcased for Christmas time would be children. Their joy at the festive season is clear for all to see, making them the ideal candidates for these idents. Now on an upward trajectory, there would only be one further Christmas ident during the lifespan of this particular set, and all eyes were on whether it would continue a unique trend of festive sequences, or whether the Christmas puddings, like the snowflakes before them, would be brought back out once again. Having only lasted on the airwaves for little over 4 years, it's easy to forget that the Rhythm and Movement set only gave us 3 unique Christmas idents during its lifetime. The first one was a first step, for sure, albeit not perfect, and the second one was designed by a young viewer, established some continuity whilst also retaining the fun and joyful elements of the season. Well, when it came to Christmas of 2005, all the stops were put out for this one, with some very interesting comparisons. With that, let's see the setup of the Christmas tree. This feels very familiar. Before we get to a very obvious comparison, let's talk about the ident itself. Once again, the stars of the sequence are a group of children, carrying baubles up a swirling ramp to hang on the grandiose Christmas tree, which acts, quite fittingly, as the centrepiece. Their outfits this time aren't snowflakes, but they sort of look like Pikmin, in a way? I'm sure that wasn't the intention, but they look odd nonetheless. We've fully abandoned a red-shaded sky this time, in favour of a variety of greens, which in my view looks a lot more appealing and better communicates the Christmassy vibe. Whilst we're on colours, I absolutely adore the selection we have on display here. Not only do we have the green sky and the expected red in both the costumes and the baubles, but we also have yellow and pink and of course the white of snow, which adorns the landscapes for a fourth year running, with Christmas trees visible in the background. It's definitely the most appealing visual for me out of the festive idents of the era, but I think it's time we discuss what this reminds me so strongly of.
More frightening than Pauline Fowler, it's the celebrity mastermind Black Chair, and Sonia, actress Natalie Cassidy, takes the lonely walk to it in an hour. First on BBC One, Michael Aspel welcomes a new generation of collectors.
In the summer of 2005, a remake of the 1971 classic, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, was released to cinemas, now named after the original book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Starring Johnny Depp as the famed chocolate maker, it received mixed reviews. Some criticised director Tim Burton's vision as being too abstract and bizarre, whereas others believed it was more faithful to the book than the Gene Wilder version. Nevertheless, the remake had a very distinct visual style, as well as a standout soundtrack, and when looking at the Christmas ident in terms of both audio and visuals, it feels very similar. The never-ending swirls on the baubles are present throughout the Chocolate Factory, and the music itself, whilst also including the BBC One jingle, sounds less Christmassy and more mysterious and ever so slightly eerie. Now, it's not known whether the designers took direct inspiration from the Tim Burton film, but considering both were first seen within months of each other, it seems like an incredible coincidence.
It's the furthest the show has ever travelled, but will the experts find what they're looking for down under? The Antiques Roadshow in Australia in half an hour, here on BBC One.
As mentioned, Christmas Tree would be the last festive ident seen in the rhythm and movement era, as 1 year later, the Circle idents had fully taken over the duties of representing BBC One. And honestly, I stand by my view that this is the best of the three idents that the set had to offer at Christmas. Not only does it have the best colour palette, I admire how musically it shrugs off the familiar festive jingles in favour of something a bit more ethereal and whimsical. It may not connect with everyone, but I think it's great. If anything, after a few attempts, it seems the designers had finally found their footing when it came to Christmas idents in the rhythm and movement era. It's such a shame we weren't to get any more, but as a final roll of the dice, I think Christmas Tree shines at the head of the pack, as not just the best festive ident of the era for BBC One, but one of the best sequences in the set as a whole. Throughout our journey so far, I've showcased to you all of the main sequences that comprise rhythm and movement during its short lifespan. However, there were relatively few special idents aside from the festive favourites that appeared during the 4 years of this era for BBC One. We've seen special Christmas idents, of course, but you could have always assumed they were a given, since they'd been a long-standing tradition for decades. However, there are two variants that only were shown in the region of Wales. Being a half Welshie myself, I'm excited to get into these. So let's begin with our first one, which I'll unofficially title Victory.
A change to the schedule now on BBC One Wales. Match of the Day will be shown at midnight and again tomorrow morning at 8:10. But now we're celebrating Wales' historic Grand Slam victory by re-showing the whole of this afternoon's game. Uninterrupted, it's Wales versus Ireland at the Millennium Stadium. Savour the next 90 minutes.
Ah, fan revelry. There's nothing quite like it. As you can see, a group of Wales fans are gathered together in a public place, most likely a pub. We don't get to see what they're watching, but it must be good news as they jump about and celebrate together, all to the soundtrack of the festival ident, which as previously mentioned is one of my absolute favourites. Seeing people celebrate something they're passionate about is always appealing in my view, but as you've probably guessed from the continuity announcer, this is marking one very special event indeed. The 2005 Six Nations Championship saw Wales come out victorious, winning all 5 of their games, giving them their first Grand Slam title since 1978, ending a 27-year gap. Given their unprecedented performance throughout the championship and their stunning victory against Ireland in the final, BBC One Wales decided that not only would this special ident be broadcast, but an alteration be made to the station's logo. If you look in the bottom left corner, you'll see the familiar red BBC One box. However, the one has been cleverly changed to 1, marking the historic victory for the Welsh. The victory ident was shown on the same day the team were crowned the winners, on the 19th of March 2005. The final game was repeated, and still remains one of the proudest moments of Welsh sport in recent memory. It's great to see as well that it's not just men in the picture, but women are here too, showcasing as many of the rhythm and movement idents do, that sport can be and should be for everyone. But amazingly, this wasn't the only ident to mark the special occasion. A second variant appeared also. This one I'll simply title Flag.
If you saw the drama Kidnapped recently here on BBC One Wales, there's a special programme about its author, The Adventures of Robert Louis Stevenson in 40 minutes, after Songs of Praise.
Best flag in the UK, always has been. Set inside a sports stadium, we see 2 figures slowly descend to the ground, carrying with them and unfurling the Welsh flag, showcasing its green, white and of course the magnificent red dragon. It's simple, yet graceful, and when set against the music originally heard in Skateboarders, I think it paints quite the serene picture indeed. Not much information is known about this one, and the continuity announcer seldom mentions football at all, rather that Songs of Praise is about to start instead. That programme tends to go out on Sundays, and given that the final game of the 2005 Six Nations was on Saturday the 19th of March, I would assume that this sequence was seen in the early hours of Sunday the 20th of March. Given that the BBC One text box still proclaims BBC One Wales and the focus on the Welsh flag, the sense of national pride would still be at its peak the day after. The 2 Wales variants in the rhythm and movement era are a rare event indeed. At a time where special idents weren't being produced as regularly on BBC One, for the Welsh to get 2 of them, not even to mark a specific programme, but more of a national achievement, is something truly worthy of being proud of. Whilst I love seeing the fans' jubilation, I think the flag is a great sequence all its own. It makes you feel a sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment, and if you're Welsh, a great sense of where you come from and being proud of it. And at the time of writing, as Wales gear up to head to their first World Cup in over 60 years, we can hope that whatever fueled them to win these Six Nations back in 2005 will continue to fuel them now in 2022. The BBC has always been able to poke a little fun at itself throughout the last 100 years, and with its idents, it's always been open to allowing a little humour grace the airwaves from time to time. Whether it's a more jokey turn from a continuity announcer, or the idents themselves being manipulated in some way, parody idents are always a fascinating subgenre in themselves. During the rhythm and movement era, several parodies would crop up, some made by the BBC, and some by other channels or entities entirely. Just a heads up, many of the clips I'm going to present today I'll have to showcase in a chopped up form, otherwise copyright claims will prevent this episode from being seen at all. So apologies if this seems a bit messy, but I hope the gist of the sequences can still come across. With that, let's start with 3 idents that pay a sort of homage to the rhythm and movement set, but these were made by E4.
You're watching E4. This is E4. This is E4.
Amusingly tongue-in-cheek, wouldn't you say? E4 is a channel that launched back in 2001, so we're still relatively new and fresh on the scene when these parodies were made, not long after the originals launched on BBC One in 2002. The 3 different parodies we get are based on capoeira, ballet, and acrobat, fittingly 3 of the earliest idents that debuted as part of the rhythm and movement package. They are obvious in what they're representing, but not disrespectful. The capoeira and ballet parodies are super short in length, but they too quickly generate some comedy. In the former's case, we see the martial artists beat each other up, and the one member of the ballet troupe who absolutely kills me off is the one on the floor just bouncing along. It's absolutely daft for sure, but you gotta admit it's funny. It's poking fun at the often controlled, very elegant style that ballet showcases, and it's all for a bit of fun, isn't it? For the acrobat parody, which is a bit more full length, we see the three drop from the roof as in the original, the material's now purple instead of red. The setting has been altered to more of a dingy warehouse with an open roof, and rather than gracefully showcase a series of moves, we see that the artists are having a little trouble in their execution. All in all, they're daft for sure, but feels typical of the kind of slant E4 was going for in its early years, poking fun at something that millions of viewers would be used to seeing every day over on BBC One. But now we move to the BBC themselves, and one of their staples in terms of comedy, the duo known as French and Saunders. Well, these are different, aren't they? By the early 2000s, French and Saunders were already well-established household names amongst the British public. As part of their shows, they paid homage to idents from the rhythm and movement set, the ever-popular acrobat, and also hip-hop, with a little bit of the salsa sequence for good measure. The first one sees the two accompany one of the artists from the original ident, only for them to awkwardly drop to the floor, hitting it like a ton of bricks. Unfazed, they quickly get up and head towards the camera, the title for their show appearing also. This is typical of the kind of comedy you would find in French and Saunders, a nice blend of awkward physical comedy with the unassuming looks of the leads, and it works a treat. During the closing credits of an episode, they decide to show their take on the hip-hop ident, or not so hip-hop as it's come to be known. We see them driving around on mobility scooters in a rather uncool way, a complete contrast to the original, and it's interesting that the location used here is the one seen in the salsa ident rather than the basketball court in hip-hop, but I still think it works just fine. Overall, the French and Saunders spoofs aren't necessarily the greatest ident parodies ever, but they succeed in combining the charm of their show into the familiar landscape of the rhythm and movement set. Now to another comedy legend, let's see how Pekarek took on hip-hop, under the guise of one of his trademark characters, Brian Potter.
Whoa, 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 I can't have that, I can't have that. No chance, these lads are clearly blessed. Hey, not dodging, son, not dodging. Whoa, whoa. That's that. Oh, see? Oh, help me! Help me!
You can't help but smile at Pekarek, can you? Similar to French and Saunders, Pekarek was a popular comedian, at the time riding high on his television show, Phoenix Nights. For the comic relief telethon of 2003, one of his characters, Brian Potter, would help introduce the night's events. By joining the athletes on the basketball court, he fumbles around, unable to pull off the moves as they do, and responding in typical fashion. It's quite simple again, but for me the dialogue works a treat. Pekar's delivery always manages to get a chuckle out of me. The second variant I find even funnier, where poor Potter once again tries to copy those surrounding him, only to topple out of his chair entirely. Physical comedy executed wonderfully, and my only criticism would be to say that it's a shame that more spoofs of other idents from this era weren't commissioned. There are a few more parody sequences from this era, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find video for all of them. In the comedy radio and television programme, Dead Ringers, one episode showcased John Culshaw, as the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, performing a dance outside of 10 Downing Street, as if it were a BBC One ident. This was seen in an episode that aired in the summer of 2003 over on BBC Two. Meanwhile, over at the recently launched BBC Three, parodies would be seen on the adult comedy animation series Monkey Dust. I could only find one short clip, but unfortunately, I'm not going to risk showing it to you here. If you have a browse, you'll know what I mean, as many of Monkey Dust parodies contained elements that aren't necessarily suitable for younger audiences. But then again, you could argue that BBC Three in its early days as a whole wasn't suitable for younger audiences. Whether you love them or hate them, I believe parodies are always a fun and interesting side note in a channel's history. Being able to open up and poke fun at yourself, or to let others do so, often yields great results, without necessarily being hurtful or disrespectful. Whether it's French and Saunders, Pekarek, or even rival channels like E4, these parodies, if anything, are a testament to the originals from the rhythm and movement set, showing that because the originals offered something interesting and inspiring, these parodies in a roundabout way pay homage to that individuality. and often can be pretty amusing and memorable in their own unique way. Overall, the rhythm and movement idents continue to garner a mixed reception, over 20 years since their initial debut on BBC One. However, what I'll always commend this set for is for trying something which at the time was radically different for the corporation's oldest channel. Instead of globes and symbols, we're presented with real people, of different ages, genders, races, cultures, abilities, skills, and so on. Across all of the sequences we've seen in the marathon, we've certainly had our variety in terms of the people showcased, and the different kinds of central concepts with them. Not every ident was a winner. It's very difficult for any setup to achieve that status, but in the 4.5 years that Rhythm and Movement represented BBC One, despite a rocky reception, they arguably reflected that the channel, and the BBC as a whole, was attempting to represent as many people as possible in a variety of unique, different, and entertaining ways. They may be overwhelmingly forgettable, or they may even be amongst your favourite idents of all time, but regardless of where you stand, the Rhythm and Movement idents marked a new turn for BBC One, attempting to fully bring them into the 21st century and to present themselves in an engaging, individual, and memorable way. Here's to this set, the people involved in its creation, and to the stars of the sequences themselves, for their work has provided millions with comfort, intrigue, and joy, for 20 years, and certainly many more years to follow. Whilst the Rhythm and Movement set is looked on with more fondness today, by the time they were phased out in 2006, it was clear that BBC One needed to win back some favour with viewers in terms of its presentation. On the 7th of October, 2006, that moment of truth would arrive. Just before we begin, a little heads up. A small selection of the sequences you'll see today I've had to trim down or mainly represent in the form of still photographs. I've unfortunately had to do this in order to make sure I don't receive any copyright notices. However, as I said, it's only on a small selection, so on the whole you'll be getting the raw video footage. So sit back, relax, and join me as we delve into the decade-long stint of the Circles idents. And we'll kick things off with probably the most recognisable of the set, hippos. Hard to believe this is over 15 years old. This simple yet engaging footage of hippos swimming about in water is instantly recognisable for several generations of viewers. This one sets the tone for how BBC One would approach idents for the next decade. A simple yet easily identifiable concept, all culminating around a central circle being formed, often in motion. Within that central circle is the BBC One logo, newly stylised in all lowercase, the first time in the channel's history that this had occurred. The hippo sequence works in many respects. The setting, in the depth of the sea, is presented in a calming and soothing manner. Seeing all these hippos, albeit many computer-generated, swimming about sets a peaceful tone, strengthened by the soft sounds of the water and the ambient soundtrack. You'll notice a central motif in terms of the music, and be prepared to hear this crop up in many of the different idents you'll see today. Overall, the hippos mark the perfect representation of the Circles set, if you ask me. It sets up that relaxing, yet engaging atmosphere that one would hope for before settling down to their favourite programmes. A strong start, but let's see if that momentum can continue as we hop on our bikes. See, the circles can be thrilling too. In a complete contrast to the serene calmness of hippos, Bike sees us view three motorcyclists as they ride around what is supposedly referred to as the Wall of Death. How cheery. As they zip around getting faster and faster, we swap to a top-down view, ultimately seeing the BBC One logo, the motorist forming the central circle motif. I like the variety of speeds that we're treated to here, from seeing them move around normally before the footage is sped up immeasurably. We also get some major flashes of the colour red, which of course is the primary colour associated with BBC One, a feature that in some part continues to this day. The soundtrack also carries the new recurring motif, but despite the consistency, I find this to be one of the weaker sequences of the original launch batch. It's not a bad ident, but beyond watching these guys circle a track, there isn't much else to keep me engaged. But keep in mind, we've got a ton of idents left to get through today, so I think we'll hit the pitch and play some football. Oh boy, that soundtrack does take me back. Deviating slightly from the norm, this funky, more produced sound became such an earworm for me during this era. Now, I'm not sporty at all, and football I rarely tune into, but seeing these players do their thing whilst accompanied with this music and this editing style was pretty boss. After some showcase of skills, we see the players in a circle, shooting footballs into the middle and ultimately across to each other. I like the final image. You have the players forming a circle, aligning with this set's central concept, but the inner ring of footballs that is created is a nice extra touch. And as all of them are red, it also makes it feel truly part of the BBC One branding. My only criticism would be that until that point, the colours seem a little drab overall. I fully understand that this could have been done to punctuate the red that we do see, but to me, football is such a lively and colourful game, so indulging in the vibrancy of it wouldn't have been a bad option. Nevertheless, the soundtrack alone makes this a winner for me, but the sequence does hold a nice progression. But now we take to the skies as we fly our kites. Kite flying seems pretty intense. I never got into the hobby myself, but I know those who do are very passionate about it. I think this ident tries to get across that thrill that can come from flying a kite, or maybe the stress when you're up against windy conditions such as this. The original soundtrack that was used for the first few years of its broadcast, I'd argue contributes to this theory. It creates a sense of excitement, of wonder, of pure enjoyment, and despite the harsh conditions, the people we see here seem to be enjoying themselves. The final image isn't the most engaging or eye-catching, but it does the job just fine. The kites vaguely form a circular pattern, and their red tones once again align with BBC One as a channel. Like football though, I can't help but feel that most of the colours besides the red of the kites have been seriously washed out. This was the late 2000s, however, and drab, dull colour palettes was somewhat of a trend in media for some reason at this time. But it's time to get out of the wind and head over to the petals. An alternative name for this ident is Ring o' Roses, based on the song and dance often performed by children, and had some rather dark origins, would you believe, but that's a story for another day. This one just represents joy, the infinite amount of fun that can be had as a child with seemingly even the most mundane things. We see this group of kids picking through flowers before playing Ring o' Roses, forming the central circle motif of the ident set. The final image is particularly striking due to the blends of colour. We of course know that the red from the rose petals is going to be predominant, but it's nice that the other colours such as greens and yellows have been thrown into the mix as well. However, the whole sequence seems to have some sort of filter layered on top of it, giving everything a sort of yellowish tint. I'm not saying it ruins the ident we get, but I do question as to whether it's necessary. But as the sun sets, it's time that we looked up to the moon. Now, this is truly beautiful. We see a group of people in fishing boats come together at the dead of night. They each carry a piece of bright white material, the only major source of light that we see. Piece by piece, they align them together, ultimately forming the moon, which hovers brightly above the water, and creating a gorgeous final image for the BBC One logo to slot into. The sight of the moon some would find serene enough, but seeing it glow brightly as it effortlessly hovers above a body of water can be quite honestly breathtaking. The music in this ident as well is just fantastic. It perfectly complements the visuals that we see on screen, and honestly, I wouldn't hesitate to say that this is truly one of the best sequences out of the entire Circle set. It's a shame then that this was one of the few regular idents to be taken out of constant circulation as early as 2008. But at least it's been preserved over the years, so we can look at how such a simple yet imaginative concept of putting the moon together can result in such an impressive and memorable result. We'll stick with the water for now, as we check out the surfers. Honestly, not too much to say on this one. It's shot really well. I like the contrasting angles we get both above and below the water of the surfers in action, and the surfers themselves are quite stunning to watch as they navigate the waves, but beyond this, there isn't too much that's gripping me. I like the surfer style soundtrack, really does give off that feeling of catching some waves on a sunny day, but for me, personally, I would have maybe liked a bit more of a build-up. Why not show a busy beach and some people excitedly heading out to the sea to surf? I wouldn't say this one is a dud, necessarily, but it just isn't one that I revisit often or that springs to memory frequently. Let's see if that changes with our next ident today, windows. An interesting idea, not sure if it works though. Amongst a block of flats, we start to see bright streams of light reflect off various windows, with different kinds of people taking note and looking outside. For me, the best part about this sequence is the final image, with the shimmering lights forming the circle against the flats themselves. Why I prefer this final point is that even though the lights are very bright, they're at a distance enough where they don't overwhelm the viewer. Now, I don't have the best eyesight in the world, but when we see the individuals be exposed to the reflections, the light feels a little bit overpowering. Not to mention that colour-wise, yet again, we are presented with a rather washed out palette. These sorts of colour choices can absolutely work in idents given the right scenario and circumstances, but so far, out of the circles we've seen, I'd argue it hinders the overall product rather than helping it. Well, we're going to move on now, from the urban jungle to a magic forest. What a truly magical ident this is. Similar to the moon sequence, this is every element working together effortlessly to create something wonderful. In a forest, we see all kinds of creatures moving about, both big and small, and even some magical fairies are flying about. As the camera shows us these different setups, we eventually come to our final point, a window into the forest in the shape of a circle, naturally, where we can see all of these animals and fairies alike going about the world. It's a lovely blend of nature and fantasy. We have creatures that we recognise and ones of the imagination, and there are a few factors that seal the deal. The first is the use of colour. The lush greens of the forest are shown off in the most beautiful fashion, and the music that accompanies the visuals is once again spot on. It inspires exploration, intrigue, wonder, and a sense of nature working and being as it should. At a time when climate change is a very real danger for us in the future, to see a sequence like this that aims to show off nature thriving alongside some magical elements to go with it makes it ever more appealing and ever more memorable. Definitely up there with Moon as one of the best idents in the entire Circle set. But we're going to leave Earth now and put our trust in the hands of Mission Control. Ah yes, a Saturday night classic. Launched in the summer of 2007, we see a pod leaving Earth into the vastness of space, before crashing down onto the surface of the moon. A rover emerges, curiously looking around taking pictures, before forming a circle, not only in keeping with the central theme of the set, but it almost looks as if the rover is trying to form some sort of signal for another craft to arrive, as we see it perfectly pass over and across the outlined area. The way in which this setting has been captured looks stunning too. Many assume moon-like landscapes are easy to recreate, but when done with so much effort and detail, the results speak for themselves. I also like the somewhat sentient personality that this rover has. Something about the way in which it moves, combined with a playful soundscape, gives the impression that this little guy has a mind all of his own, exploring space in the same way that we humans would, and keep in mind this was a whole year before WALL-E hit the cinemas. Overall, this is another belter from the Circles era. I also link it to Saturday nights before the entertainment lineup got underway, and I'm sure a similar sentiment will be shared by tons of viewers. But from the depths of outer space, we're moving to something a little more earthbound, namely, the lawn. There's something eerily creepy about this one. We can see the setting is right in the heart of suburbia, with a bunch of women all mowing their respective lawns. However, you notice from the word go that there is something rather distant about them all. They look like they're lost in some sort of trance, and the music we hear almost has that listful, hypnotic quality about it, one in which you feel you could easily lose yourself in. By the time we zoom out, we see the women have been mowing a bunch of crop circles, which perfectly suit the BBC One logo. The notion of crop circles is a sci-fi cliché that has been around for decades, and the idea that they act as some sort of message or symbol to beings from another world. And given the trance-like state these women seem to be in, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the concept for this ident was directly inspired by that notion. I think a little extra touch, similar to what we see in Mission Control, would have been for some sort of shadow to glide across the screen, further leaning into the notion that the lawn circles the ladies have formed are speaking to some kind of extraterrestrial. I'm glad to have another winner on our hands for the circles, and I think this next one will absolutely be in the hearts of some of you. It's Neon. It doesn't get much better than this, man. Neon, like hippos, is arguably one of the most recognisable idents of the Circle era, and even before I give my thoughts, it's easy to see why. On a dark evening, the streets are illuminated by the bright neon signs, which come to life to enjoy their own night of fun. The star, if you will, is Mary, who with a wink comes to life and leads the charge of all the other neon creatures, strutting their stuff down the streets, heading directly for the Ferris wheel, which they eventually have a go on. The choice of a Ferris wheel to be featured as part of the Circle's batch seems like an obvious no-brainer, but I like how the central focus throughout is placed on the various neon characters. The varied mix of bright colours and detail help you easily distinguish who is who, and pausing these sequences in any number of frames is an absolute treat. The funky music we hear too is absolutely perfect for the visuals, giving us that feeling that we're going for a night out and we're going to have a good time, building to a glorious crescendo by the time we've reached the Ferris wheel. My only gripe would be that I wish we had even more time with these animated characters, to see more shots of them, give us more of what these characters are like and what kind of fun they like to embrace. Now, for a few years, Neon was shown exclusively on Saturday nights, which is where I best remember it. However, after receiving a trimmed edit in 2009, it would be seen far more regularly throughout the week. Whilst the shortened version, with different music as well, lasted a lot longer than the original, it is that original that sticks in my head the most. Without a doubt, one of the best the Circles era has to offer, and one of the best BBC idents of the 21st century so far, that's for sure. But after such an elaborate creation such as this, I think we better take to the skies once again, in the helicopter. Hauntingly beautiful. Some would argue it's too downbeat and somber, but I think this fits everything just perfectly. It gives more majesty to the shots of the helicopter flying over the sea, emphasising the water's vast and unpredictable nature, the power it can hold within. By the time we reach the helipad, which acts as the circle for the BBC One logo, you almost forget you're watching a mere ident, and instead opening to some sort of epically shot nature documentary, with capes. Tell you what, this era has a knack for the serene. Debuting in 2008, we see a bunch of cyclists, all wearing different coloured ponchos, cycling around the streets of London. Eventually they form a multicoloured circle, setting up the place for the BBC One logo. Many viewers may remember this one as being the main ident shown on the iPlayer, particularly if you were re-watching a drama from BBC One. But aside from the lovely final image, the build-up to it, at least in the ident's original form, is great too. Seeing the excessive rain, often slowed down as the cyclists zip by, looks fantastic, and what complements it all perfectly is the music. It's soft, not too excessive, and as it broadens out into the familiar BBC One jingle, the rain also subsides, and the bright sun shines on. It's these kind of progressions in idents that seem quite straightforward, but when all the moving parts are working so wonderfully in tandem as they are here, it really creates a great impact. So Capes is yet another fine example of showing us something quite ordinary and mundane, presenting it in a fresh new way, one that has helped Capes become one of the more talked about idents from the Circle set. But if cycling isn't your thing, perhaps you're more inclined to watch The Dogs. Such wonderful creatures, dogs, aren't they? We see a pack of them undergo some kind of obstacle course, jumping through fiery hoops, jumping over hurdles, forming a pyramid, and even being catapulted off seesaws. On the surface, making an ident revolving around dogs seems like an obvious winner, given the nation's affinity with them. But what I like is, the approach here doesn't feel lazy at all. I like seeing the different and often humorous tasks which these dogs have to undergo. I like the sense that there is a leader acting as some sort of drill sergeant, the music blaring in the background, giving off vibes to some film classics. The Great Escape came to my mind. The final image is nice too, and again, humorous to see the ringleader try and work his way into the ever-evolving circle. I don't have too much more to say on this one, only that it puts a smile on my face every time I see it pop up, and it also makes me want a dog, like, really badly. But throwing things back to what we can do, it's time to show off our pedal power.
Mystic Mo makes a prediction for Charlie. EastEnders in half an hour here on BBC One after Bang Goes the Theory.
These hold a certain charm, don't they? Pedals was first seen in the summer of 2009 to coincide with a new programme, Bang Goes the Theory, a series made in collaboration with the Open University. Given that this series was steeped in science, making an ident that shows what human power can achieve does make some sort of sense. We see a group of people all pedalling ferociously, ultimately generating electricity to illuminate a circle of lights. Whilst I do like this sequence for how it ties into the upcoming programme, I feel something a little more interesting or elaborate could have been generated. Don't get me wrong, showing how we can make electricity just by pedaling is great, but why not devise a series of these, or at least extend this base sequence, perhaps panning across a variety of different experiments going on, all of which can again tie in to Bang Goes the Theory. Pedals is seldom talked about these days, and whilst its foundations are solid, I still think it needed a bit more to delve into, to truly make it a unique and standout programme-specific ident. But we're hopping off our bikes to head down to the stadium.
From Ellis Park, Johannesburg, Diego Maradona's Argentina face Nigeria now on BBC One and the BBC HD channel for our World Cup Match of the Day live.
Definitely captures the vibe of a stadium. Now, I'm no major lover of football, as stated earlier, but the few times I've been in environments like these, when that positive energy and everyone is watching together, it truly can be quite the feeling. Here we see some spectators really enjoying a game before waving a series of materials, the centre of which being the lovely red for which BBC One has become associated with. I like the subtle homage to the Cape's ident too, represented by the numerous rings of multicoloured circles that surround it. This ident itself was first introduced in 2010 to coincide with that year's World Cup, and it was used after that for various sporting events of different levels for several years. I understand its relevance to that genre and why many may like it, but to be honest, this doesn't really do it for me. I'd much rather take the footballers that we saw earlier. I mean, that felt much more engaging than what we're presented with here. But now we're going to move on to the last of the Circle's idents that received somewhat regular airplay on BBC One, and quite fittingly, its television centre.
Well, Strictly may be coming from Blackpool tonight, but we don't want BBC Television Centre to miss out. If you are one of the lucky few invited to twirl around our donuts and haven't spotted yourself yet, don't panic. Your moves could be on the longer version. Check it out at the Strictly website.
Always good to see the old donut. Television Centre is such an icon when it comes to TV in the UK. Ever since it first opened its doors in the 1960s, it became the centre point for several high-profile programmes and productions for several decades. In 2010, this ident was commissioned primarily to introduce one of the Beeb's most popular programmes, Strictly Come Dancing. We see tons of people arrive at TV Centre, all to begin dancing round the main courtyard, the final shot being this beautiful top-down view, showing the dancers as well as the iconic central fountain. I think this is a lovely tribute to the centre as a whole, made even more poignant given the fact that just a few years after this ident was introduced, TV Centre, as it was, began to close down. It would have been ace to see a brand new sequence perhaps going through some of the many memories that have been made at the place, but even with what we get, these revellers dancing in the courtyard is charming enough to do the job. So not the best, not by a long shot, but even in a small way, perhaps unintentionally, it's a nice and fitting tribute piece to the original Television Centre. So now we've covered the main batch of idents that were in some sort of regular rotation on BBC One at various points between 2006 and 2016. However, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there was a ton of specially made idents amongst the Circle set that were only seen in certain regions, specific days, or some of them even being a one-time only broadcast. We'll be looking at the ones that are completely original, sequences that just slightly modify existing Circles idents won't be counted this time. I've tried to account for all of them here, but if I've missed one or two, that's just the way it is sometimes. With that said, let's get into the first of these special sequences, that being Daffodils.
Following the Oscars, we've a round on films on Pointless in 45 minutes. First on BBC One Wales, how about another summer holiday? We can dream.
As a half Welshie myself, how can I not enjoy this? St David's Day is celebrated on the 1st of March every year, and exclusively for viewers in BBC One Wales, they will be treated to this sequence for the majority of the Circle ident's life. Daffodils are a beautiful flower to begin with, but to see a bunch of them like this arranged amongst a vibrant, calming water-based background truly feels like a comfort to watch. The gorgeous yellow of the daffodils contrasts beautifully with the background, and whilst the overall image is a stunner, I do wish some sort of effect could have been used to show the daffodils grow or bloom. I think that emergence, that blossoming of life would have been a great way to showcase St David's Day. But as is, this is a lovely homage nonetheless. In 2012, to mark the Story of Wales programme that aired on St David's Day, this special ident was shown, merely showing people walking into a sunset. It looks nice enough, I mean, who doesn't love a peaceful looking sunset? But beyond that, I felt like I didn't really have too much to say on it, but thought it was worth mentioning nonetheless. And to continue with our theme of Welsh exclusive idents on BBC One Wales, we're going to head back to the pitch.
Time to go the extra mile now on BBC One Wales with the climax of the Sport Relief weekend. We join John Inverdale and Jake Humphrey for the 2008 Sport Relief Mile Show.
Certainly one way to celebrate a win. Wales were victorious in the 2008 Six Nations tournament, and not only is it a massive cause for celebration for Wales fans everywhere, but it has precedent, for BBC One at least, to bust out special sequences. Back in 2005, during the Rhythm and Movement era, two special idents themed around Wales were shown for similar reasons. The way this ident is played out is relatively simple, a montage of clips from the event played on an old CRT, with the music from bikes playing in the background. It's a shame that a new piece of original music couldn't have been commissioned for this, but for a last-minute sequence with the sole purpose of celebrating a Welsh victory, it works, like in this sequence from a few years later.
In 45 minutes, we'll be in it to win it with the National Lottery here on BBC One Wales and on HD. That's after we round up a few more pointless celebrities.
I'm telling you, the Welsh love to celebrate. This one again is quite simple, focusing on the stadium to begin with before the ball is kicked into the sky, bursting into a flurry of fireworks. Once more, the logo has been changed to read BBC One Wales, and I like how that small alteration has become a tradition for these occasions. Wales won the Six Nations in both 2012 and 2013, and this ident could be from either of those years. Whilst I don't have much more to say on it, I do think it's nice that a nation and its leading broadcaster can feel they can go against the norm and take the time to indulge and celebrate, because who doesn't love a good bout of celebrations at the end of the day? The Triple Crown ident, on the other hand, I have less to say about that one. Whilst it again is a celebratory ident for Wales, with the one captioning being seen once more, aside from the image of the crowns, that's pretty much it. It's a nice image, for sure, but if you really want to celebrate, I think I appreciate the idents that go a little bit further with that aspect in mind. We're going to jump all the way to the final year of the Circle's life now, in 2016, as this year, again, was a special one for Wales sporting-wise, and I'll explain why after Wales celebrates.
So, Portugal-Wales on Radio Wales and Radio Cymru now. The One Show moves to BBC Two Wales now, making way for Andy Murray, live here on BBC One Wales in the quarterfinals at Wimbledon.
An interesting idea here. In 2016, Wales progressed quite far in the UEFA European Championships, further than I think anyone had expected. This footage is following from Wales' 3-1 victory against Belgium, showing the whole team gathering to celebrate. Whilst essentially using existing footage may seem lazy, I have to admit I'm surprised at how the music from the regular football ident blends into this. It may have been nice to start with this and perhaps show some highlights from said game, but this one just feels more charming than anything. Always nice to see a nation celebrate, as I've said, but I'd hope for a bit more going into the future. But we'll jump from Wales, further up north to Scotland, to look at an ident celebrating one of their most famous sons, Robert Burns.
Ireland meets a boy band who mix pop with hymns on Songs of Praise. That's at 5 to 5. But first on BBC One Scotland, a whole week of drama for you from Albert Square.
Quite cute, and clever if you know your poetry. We see two mice chasing around after each other in a busy study, papers adorning the room. Commissioned in 2009 to commemorate the 250th anniversary of Robert Burns' birth, keen admirers of the poet will notice one of his works, To a Mouse, as one of the manuscripts that adorn the room. Fitting, of course, as our central focus is on the two mice, who as they circle the room, ultimately see the reveal of the BBC One Scotland logo. It's a charming sequence for sure, and the music further adds to a sense of playfulness and fun, but I'm surprised this one was only really used in this one year, given that Burns Night is celebrated in Scotland every year. I would have liked it to give us a bit more about Burns himself, and perhaps more clear examples of his work. Again, it's just nice to see the different regions of the UK get these exclusive sequences for different occasions. Nothing groundbreaking, but nice to see. And now to look at another regional exclusive, we move to Northern Ireland for Wild Week.
Back to school with Waterloo Road in half an hour on BBC One Northern Ireland. But before that, we're halfway through our Wild Week and it's breezy out there tonight on Strangford Lough, so wrap up warm.
Ducks, man. How can you not love ducks? The Wild Week season was seemingly exclusive to BBC One Northern Ireland, so it's pretty neat that the region got its own original ident to mark the occasion. There's nothing much to it really, just a duck shaking its feathers about whilst it sits calmly in the water. The circle for this sequence supposedly being made up of water droplets. It's a bit of a tenuous link to the theme overall, to be honest, and not as cohesive as many other idents we've looked at today. However, to see this close-up of one of my favourite birds, in slow motion and in HD, is certainly a treat for the eye. It's by no means a great ident, but as an eye-catching one, sure, works just fine. I mean, what else do you want me to say? It's a duck just chilling in the water as nature intended. Can't argue with Mother Nature, but ducks aren't the only thing that can often be found in water. Another iconic sight can be tall ships.
Three dads and their daughters all buying homes under the hammer in 45 minutes. First on BBC One Northern Ireland, your call could make the difference.
I've got to be honest, I didn't know this was a thing. Tall ship races occur every year, with the 2015 contest being held in Belfast. To mark said occasion, BBC One Northern Ireland debuted this special sequence, showing the gradual unfurling and reveal of sails before revealing the tall ships in the water. Our central one is splashed in green, a colour commonly associated with Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole. I must say that design-wise, this has quite a classic feeling to it in terms of visuals. It feels quite simple, but appealing to look at nonetheless. Rather than newly composed music, the soundtrack from the regular Windows ident is reused here, and it does fit quite decently. Though I can't help but feel that a new piece, perhaps something reflecting sea shanties or tunes of old, would have been more appropriate for the competition. But Northern Ireland does have a long history with ships, something we'll touch upon a little bit later. But for now, just as Wales had created something original for the 2016 Euros, Northern Ireland had duly followed suit.
Now on BBC One Northern Ireland, it's Euro 2016 Match of the Day with Gary Lineker. England against Russia and Wales against Slovakia. Euro 2016 highlights with Match of the Day at 10:35. Now though, here on BBC One Northern Ireland, will Big Mac be the big man?
A cute concept, but again, just a little lacklustre. The execution of these sequences is by having one locked off camera shot focusing on two different fans, one young, one older. And again, conceptually, I like this idea. Whether you love or hate football, you can't deny that those who class themselves as fans spans generations and probably will continue to do so for years to come. So, at a time of national competition, to show two different demographics of spectator coming to support their team is admirable, to say the least. But with this one shot, and the often slightly unsettling stares, these just come across as a little lazy, at least in my view. Why not show all the different kinds of fans all together, or coming together for one big celebratory chant as the BBC One logo appears? That would at least make a bit more sense with the circle's motif than what we get here. But remember how I said that Northern Ireland has a history with ships? Well, let's take a look at some special idents made for the Titanic.
EastEnders kicks off the Tuesday night drama at 7:30. Now though, let's play Pointless.
Quite an epic sense of history here. The Titanic, of course, was a ship that famously sank back in 1912, and around the 100th anniversary of said disaster, BBC One Northern Ireland decided that two original idents should represent a season of programming in March and April of 2012. The first variant sees some workers hammering rivets into presumably the hull of the ship itself, bonding it together to prepare for its maiden voyage, a voyage it would sadly not be able to complete. I like the different angles at which it's been shot, and the final close-up on the scolding rivet marks a nice image for the Circle and BBC One logo to appear. However, I much prefer the second variant produced for the season. In this one, we get a short glimpse into the delicate process of creating stained glass, beautiful artwork that carries with it a sense of elegance and status. The Titanic, touted to be the most impressive ship ever crafted at the time, carried such stained glass. Seeing the artist piece it together is quite a relaxing experience, and the final image, with a red circle nicely providing the placeholder for the BBC One logo, looks stunning. Almost makes you wish we could have seen the full finished result of the piece. The sparse yet haunting soundtrack further adds to the impact this ident has too, and I think it creates a rather fitting sequence for the Titanic season as a whole. But moving away from real history, it's time we took a look at an original sequence created for a specific programme, and we'll start with popular drama, Ashes to Ashes.
People's hero turned public enemy now on BBC One and BBC HD, Conspiracy and Blackmail in the Darkness.
This one just feels really cool. Ashes to Ashes was a hit drama set in the 1980s, a pseudo-sequel to Life on Mars, which was set in the 70s. Right off the bat, we see some of the central characters drive about slowly in an Audi Quattro, the year supposedly being 1982. As we get a glimpse of the dingy street, the car eventually speeds off in a rush, the dust that kicked up forming the circle for the sequence, the BBC One logo shown with a neon glare. Very appropriate given it's promoting a programme set in the neon-adorned 80s. The music in this one is superb too. A subtle synth-based arrangement underscores the potential tension as the characters drive slowly past the camera, building to a slightly bolder motif as they speed away before quickly settling back to something a bit calmer. A mastery of music matching the visuals. My only criticism would be that I would want this to be much longer, and to show our characters in some of the different settings that we'd see in the programme itself. But to be fair, what we have here works great. The inclusion of the characters makes it very clear what programme is upcoming, and the blend of the mysterious visuals and music really make you feel intrigued, excited, and ready for an episode of Ashes to Ashes. But if you want to hit that ballroom, then do we have the show for you.
Starring Kylie, the PM, and Gene Hunt. Well, almost. The Impression Show at 9:30. Now it's either BBC One or the BBC HD channel. He's at home with the flu, so with Brucey off his feet, look who's filling his shoes.
Glitter balls, not disco balls. There's a difference. On the surface, it's pretty self-explanatory as to what programme this is promoting, that being Strictly Come Dancing. This was seen during the 2009 series, and oddly, never again until 2016, when the colour of the balls was changed from silver to gold. Whilst there's something strangely satisfying about watching these spheres spin and glitter all over the place, all accompanied to a lovely piece of music that blends both the Strictly and BBC One themes, there is something very bare bones about the ident. It's one of those where there isn't a great deal going on, and beyond the initial few seconds of intrigue, what is there to keep me interested as a viewer? Why not pan across the dance floor, show us more key iconography that is associated with the programme, even a glimpse of the hosts? Something like that could have added so much detail to the sequence. The dawn of the 2010s, I feel, was the beginning of many special idents for channels generally getting a little lazier in their execution. We'll see if that theory holds up with our next sequence today, Down on Albert Square. And so the square becomes the circle. This ident was devised to help celebrate EastEnders' 25th anniversary, which took place in 2010. We see numerous characters from the soap all stare in amazement at the centre of the square, which by the virtue of TV magic has now been transformed into a circle, namely so we can get a nice bird's eye view shot of the familiar set, for the BBC One logo to take centre stage. First off, like with the Glitterballs idents, I love how they've blended musical themes here. The BBC One motif can be heard clearly, but the EastEnders keys are easy to spot too. Now, I know this whole ident will mean a lot more to fans of the show, unlike myself. Beyond Phil Mitchell and Peggy, I have pretty much no idea who any of these characters are, so the impact that this would have is absolutely lost on me. As it stands, it's a charming, rather amusing tribute to the BBC's most popular soap opera, and to be honest, if they ever run out of plot ideas, turning Albert Square into Albert Circle could be a last-ditch effort. But we're going way back now, to prehistoric times, for Planet Dinosaur.
Saving nature's miracle babies from extinction at 6, and now though brought to life in high definition on BBC One HD, cutting-edge animation of epic proportions. Discover the lost world of Planet Dinosaur.
Dinosaurs are always cool, right? No wonder we've had several documentaries or recreations of them on television. This ident was specially created to promote Planet Dinosaur, a series that aired in the autumn of 2011. We see a Camptosaurus munching on some greenery before the camera reveals a larger beast, an Allosaurus. We quickly zoom in on its eye, where the BBC One logo is located, the eye as a whole acting as the circle for this sequence. It makes for quite an arresting final image, one that's quite surreal, seeing a well-known TV logo right in the eye of a giant CGI dinosaur. The whole vibe of the ident is actually quite eerie, emphasised in part by the fact that there is no music to accompany it. All you get are the sounds of nature, which add to a sense of something coming, which obviously eventually does in our Allosaurus. I do wish we had a few more shots before we zoom into the big dino's eye, maybe showing off some of the different beasts we'll see in the series or some of the locations that we'd find them in, but this wouldn't be the only nature-based special ident in the Circles era. Oh no, there was tons of them, and to show you what's next, we'll head on over to Africa.
Our wonderful world at its very best now on BBC One and in stunning high definition on BBC One HD. David Attenborough begins a breathtaking new series exploring the vast natural wonders of Africa.
Now on BBC One Scotland and in high definition on BBC One Scotland HD, the setting sun yields to a dazzling display of stars as David Attenborough brings us another sparkling portrait of Africa.
I think flamingos are my spirit animal. For the 6-part Africa documentary series that debuted in early 2013, we see 2 new original sequences appear on BBC One to promote the broadcast. The first one shows a bunch of flamingos, and when I say a bunch, I mean quite literally thousands of them. The final image is quite jaw-dropping actually, but I have to be honest, as much as I love flamingos, I do wish we had a bit more to view on them than just standing idly around. But we may be seeing more of these flamingos a little bit later. The second variant to promote Africa decides to give us a view of the vast landscapes that make up the continent. We see a setting sun disappear, the night sky coming wonderfully into the picture, and several stars shimmering spectacularly. While this is quite a beautiful vista, I'm not overly wowed necessarily by these sorts of idents. They're quite nice to look at, but for me at least, there's not too much for me to engage with after the first few seconds. Perhaps we'll find something a little more engaging on the frozen planet.
Now, 4 years in the making, and in visually stunning high definition on BBC One HD. In a brand new series, David Attenborough takes us on a journey to a world beyond imagination in Frozen Planet.
Nature never ceases to amaze. The vista chosen for this ident is rather beautiful. A sharp sun beaming down onto an Arctic terrain where we can see tons of penguins going about their day down below. The ident was devised to promote Frozen Planet, a documentary series fronted by the absolute legend that is Sir David Attenborough. The time-lapse effect really works for this sequence, as we see the sun rise and the penguins move about below. It paints this rather serene picture of what can be found on our world, even in the coldest regions. I just wish though that there were more variants, or that this one could be expanded upon. Whilst the visuals are gorgeous, getting a glimpse at different frozen landscapes and the creatures that inhabit them. I suppose less is more was the intention with this one, and it does work to a degree, but I think more definitely could have been worked in. But let's see if David's programmes can strike a winner with special idents as we settle down for Planet Earth Live. Not bad, but are you seeing a pattern here? We start things off well, getting a great shot of the Earth from space before we zoom in, rotate and settle on a barren plain. We see a man standing atop a vehicle, observing the elephants in the distance. I'm guessing this is supposed to be David Attenborough, perhaps? Whilst the final vista is quite pleasing to the eye, I do find this one a little bit recyclable. I say that because in many ways, it's quite similar to Frozen Planet. A sun, be it rising or setting being the focus, and showcasing the land below. It makes sense cohesively, I guess, as these nature documentaries are all under similar umbrellas, but I was hoping for something a bit more unique and a bit more detailed. But I'm all for second chances, so let's see what new ident was made for Planet Earth 2.
We've made it through a rocky week. It's Liam Whitney's big day. EastEnders in an hour, then Citizen Khan. The brand new series starts at 8:30. But getting Friday night started here on BBC One, Ewan McGregor, Michael Ball and Alfie Boe. Ruffling feathers and putting on a real show this Sunday night. The launch of a landmark series and the legend behind it, Sir David Attenborough, is among the stars on the sofa right now, with some strong language here on BBC One.
Nice to see multiple variants for one programme. 3 different idents ran in circulation during Planet Earth 2's broadcast. The first of them, Mountains, is as straightforward as it gets. A static shot at a group of them, time-lapsed to show the passing days and nights. Does it look visually impressive? Yes. Does the effect wear off fast? In my case, sadly it's another yes. The second one features 2 ibexes, desert-dwelling goats traversing a rather rocky terrain. This one is just stressful more than anything else. With how little ground there is, you find yourself on edge that these 2 could tumble off the face of the rock at any moment. Thankfully, that doesn't happen. That'd be quite the thing to show as an ident on primetime BBC One. The third and final variant is without question my favourite. A flock of flamingos move through the water gracefully and effortlessly, all to the soundtrack of the Glitter Ball sequence, which at first seems like a rather odd choice, but when paired with these fabulous creatures' movement, it actually works quite well. I could just watch flamingos all day, honestly. Fascinating species. Perhaps we could have seen more of their activities as opposed to just watching them wade through the water, but amongst the 3 variants commissioned for Planet Earth 2, I'd rather they just have saved the money and used this one exclusively. To round off our look at nature, we've got one more original ident for Life Story. Fish are funny creatures, aren't they? I've always found the life found in the depths of the water to be fascinating to view and learn about, and in their natural environments such as this, witnessing what they can do is truly quite remarkable. To promote the David Attenborough-fronted Life Story series in 2014, the fish chosen to help promote it in ident form is the humble pufferfish. We see it dig its body into the ground, ultimately revealing that it's been making a pattern in the shape of a circle, in the hopes of attracting a mate, I guess. Whilst the final pattern is quite appeasing to the viewer's eye, the payoff doesn't really feel that worth it. Also, the music used is far too grandiose compared to the visuals we have on screen. It gives this big epics feeling sound, which is fine, but perhaps for an ident that visually embodies that epicness. This should be more calm and serene audio-wise to reflect what we're seeing. So whilst the blue tones of the water are great, and the pufferfish is amusing, though we never see it fully inflated, it's another ident for a nature programme that just sort of exists. Nothing terrible, but nothing remarkably special either. We've had our fill of nature now, I think, so how's about we go back into the studio for the voice?
One of today's contestants actually says what could go wrong. Cooking fish with pear? He's about to find out. MasterChef follows. First on BBC One, Bianca's told the police about Liam. Question is, how long before she regrets it?
Bit mixed on this one. This is obviously advertising a series of the talent show The Voice, which made its debut on the BBC back in the early 2010s. This original ident basically must have been shot during one of the recording days for the show, and we start by seeing our 4 judges, Danny O'Donoghue, Sir Tom Jones, Jessie J and will.i.am, whose chairs all spin around to gaze at the person on stage, which is us. The camera perspective flips to be looking out from the stage, the microphone front and centre. This is part of the sequence I like the most. The image of the mic in the middle is quite stunning, and also summarises the nerves one can have when about to perform in front of a group of judges, and a studio audience to boot. The stuff with the judges spinning is fine, as it's the central premise of the show, but it's nothing all too exciting, at least for me. Had they just focused on the mic from the start, with maybe the lights coming on and the judges revealed, that could have been more impactful. But I was never really a big fan of The Voice anyway, so how about we look at a rather special sequence from Children in Need.
Well, have you got your onesie on? We're going pyjamas with Blue Peter. Join the bids to break the world record for onesie wearing now as we settle into a night of Children in Need with a one-show special which contains some strobe lighting.
This feels like quintessential Children in Need, doesn't it? Children in Need is an annual telethon that has been running yearly since 1980. The main aim is to raise tons of money for children's charities and causes all around the world, with several celebrities and personalities taking part, often for free, to help the cause. In 2012, the theme seemed to be all around onesies, which were all the rage back in the early 2010s. In an attempt to break the world record for most onesies worn by a group of people, it only makes sense that that ambition worked its way into this special ident. Now, Children in Need had dabbled in special idents before, but these were mainly just some of the regular circle sequences, ever so slightly amended. This one, however, is completely original. We see a bunch of onesie-clad children passing a ball down a line before we reach the centre, where the camera cuts to a top-down view, the circle swirling round and the BBC One logo appearing. The primary thing I like about this sequence is the sense of fun, that effortless joy that can often be found during Children in Need, alongside the bouts of sadness when we see the horrors that some children have to face. The colour scheme here is also spot on, a bright assortment of several primary colours, exactly the kind of tones you'd want for an event such as this. My only major criticism is that the reveal of the top-down view could have had a better build-up. We see these children passing a ball around, but what for? Maybe some cameos from that year's celebrity lineup could have appeared? But in any case, as special idents go, this one does its job well, encouraging us all to get our onesies on and do our bit where we can to support those children most in need. And for the theme of onesies, we'll be touching on those again a little bit later. But 2012 wouldn't be the only year during the Circles era in which Children in Need would receive its own unique ident. They followed this one up in 2013 with Spots.
Thousands of you sent in your spots for Blue Peter's Get Spotted campaign, and here they are, as we begin a star-studded night of fundraising on BBC One with the one-show Children in Need special.
Glad they maintained the colourful look. As onesies had been the theme of Children in Need during 2012, for 2013 it seems they adopted a focus on spots, which are found on the eye bandage of the event's mascot, Pudsey Bear. Pudsey himself makes an appearance, knocking on our screens before a series of unique spots spawns from the centre, forming our central circle. I love the abundance of colourful spots throughout the ident. Again, when advertising or promoting programmes or events such as Children in Need, a bright colour palette goes such a long way. My main criticism, though, would be that I wish we had more of a closer and detailed look at the unique spots that are hidden behind the BBC One logo. Perhaps it would have been better to show the children who designed these spots holding them up for camera, thus including participants just like in last year's ident. Overall though, this spotty sequence isn't bad at all. It follows the principle of the circle set more closely, but still containing those elements that imply it's part of children in need. And whilst we're on the topic of colourful, entertaining idents, how about we check in to the House of Fun?
So, lottery tickets at the ready for later, along with Who Dares Wins. Now on BBC One and brightening up the BBC HD Channel 2, we're still a good few steps from the Emerald City.
Oh boy, now this feels like a proper time capsule. The House of Fun ident was shown on Saturday nights during the spring of 2010 to promote the programme lineup on BBC One. 3 of the central programmes that made up the schedule at the time were Total Wipeout, Over the Rainbow, and Doctor Who. First off, doesn't this animation look lovely? It was created by Aardman Animations, and if you're familiar with their work, then the quality should come as no surprise. We see Graham Norton be chased into Television Centre by an irate Dalek. Note the 3 singers singing Under the Rainbow at the top of the old donut. Inside TV Centre, it turns out it is a real funhouse, with Richard Hammond gliding down a slide, him being the host of Total Wipeout at the time, represented further by the famous Big Red Balls. Hiding behind Charlotte Church, Graham is saved by the arrival of the 11th Doctor, played by Matt Smith. Another fun little note is if you look under the TARDIS, you'll see the hand, hat and feet of a certain wicked witch. Using his sonic screwdriver, the Doctor is able to defeat the Dalek by activating one of the boxing gloves in the wall, knocking it over and further diminishing any threat the creature's ever had. The final image, zoomed out to show TV Centre and the House of Fun within forming the circle for the logo, is just an absolute stunner. I love these sorts of light-hearted animated sequences, ones where you can feel a real sense of time, effort and detail has gone into creating it. Now, you'd expect that from Aardman, given their track record, but it just makes you wish that all the other sequences that feel subpar could have had emphasis like this. A wonderful way to round off our look at original special idents to promote specific programmes. I am aware there were some made for Series 3 of Torchwood, Children of Earth, but these are merely some of the regular idents from the Circles era, adapted to have Torchwood iconography and clips glitched in every now and then. Thought I'd touch on them briefly, but we'll move on now to some new idents that were made to celebrate the years.
So, Father Brown is back later at 2:15 trying to solve the mysterious death of an ex-soldier. Now on BBC One though, how appealing does this look right now?
Ooh, a very interesting blend. These ones are more unique in a way, as they feature the BBC One at the start of the ident instead of the end. The logo quickly disappears amidst a scene of circular pillars, which rise and fall, spiral and swirl around, before revealing the tagline for these sequences, Love 2013 and 2014 respectively. I like how we go from the uniformity of these red pillars to different shades of multiple colours, all of which spelling out the words in an eye-grabbing and rather abstract manner. For those with a keen eye, and I'm surprised I caught this out with my awful eyesight to be honest, you may notice that the font chosen for this new slogan echoes retro video games, specifically from the 8-bit era. The soundtracks to the two, both of them different, also contains little blips and bloops that again reflect that era of gaming. I'm not sure why this retro throwback inspiration was included for these special idents, but it's something different, particularly for the BBC. The Love branding didn't stick around past 2014, in fact, something rather different would take up 2015. However, before we take a look at that, let's take a look at one of the variants of these, Love Spring. Now this is glorious. The overall premise and shots are mostly the same, however there are some pretty big changes to the variant. When the pillars begin to appear, a wave of bright wonderful yellow shoots out, drowning out the normally typical BBC One red. As this happens, we can see flowers beginning to grow out of the ground, perhaps the most common thing to happen during springtime. We pan out to see the new slogan, Love Spring, and whilst the final image is super striking, being adorned in yellow, I do wish the whole text had been shades of green as opposed to a split. Keeping the word love in yellow blends it into the background far too much. if they'd have made it the same colour as the word spring or kept it in the typical BBC One red, either would have worked infinitely better. It is nice though, seeing something other than red dominate a picture like this, particularly in something from the Circles era. The circle itself is kept, with it occasionally shooting round in a wave of red, again a very visually striking feature. Ultimately, whilst Love 2013 and 14 have their charms, I think Love Spring has to be my favourite. It just pushes the boat out that little bit more, and in the end, it's better for it. But as I mentioned before, something completely different debuted on BBC One for 2015, so let's take a look at that one.
Spring has sprung for Vern and his woodland friends at 10:20 animated comedy Over the Hedge here on BBC One. First, Jerry Seinfeld and Renee Zellweger star in B-Movie.
Bored with being adults, three men decide it was much more fun at college. Stay up late with Will Ferrell in Old School at 2:20.
A cute little idea. Shame it didn't last. But stepping back a few years, remember how I said onesies would crop up again? Well, I wasn't fibbing.
Now to rejoin the funniest night of the year for comic relief, welcome to BBC Onesie, as we settle down in our onesies for a great night of comedy and fundraising, with some strong language possible.
This one just feels weird. Carrying the popular onesie trend through into 2013 for comic relief, not only would they feature in another special ident, but they would change the name of the channel entirely to BBC Onesie, which is cute in one respect, but oddly irritating in another. We see a bunch of people in various different onesies, dancing around and walking, or more like frantically scrambling, up a curved flight of stairs, which to be fair serves as a great template for the circle. I have to say though, for whatever reason, I find this ident more awkward than anything else. I can't put my finger on it, but the dancing these guys do is questionable, and seeing them frantically scramble, which I guess is to showcase a sense of fun and carefreeness, just comes across as a little unsettling, given there's no added context. I'm glad the BBC Onesie thing didn't carry on much past this. I don't mind a good onesie, don't get me wrong, but in terms of ident presentation, once or twice is more than enough. Jumping back now to the sporting world, BBC One would happily contribute some original idents for some of the biggest events in the calendar, such as the Commonwealth Games in 2014.
Scotland takes centre stage now on BBC One. Sit back and enjoy a glorious show, the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games 2014. On your marks, get set, Glasgow.
Ah, lovely Glasgow. The Commonwealth Games are a sporting event held every 4 years, in a similar manner to the Olympics. For 2014, the host city was Glasgow in Scotland, and as we've seen earlier, BBC One is often more than happy to contribute a special ident for one of the UK regions, this one being shown nationwide. We are treated to an aerial view of the city as we head towards the night, panning over various venues that will play host to some of the Commonwealth Game events. The final shot focuses on one of the bigger buildings, the SSE Hydro, which conveniently happens to nicely form a great circle shape for the BBC One logo to occupy. The music is borrowed from the Capes ident, which again is fine and works well enough, but I always find it a bit disappointing when not all of the special idents get their own special piece of music. Or hell, even stock or existing music for that matter. Just moving one soundtrack along to another sequence feels very uninspired, but I digress. The final image focusing on the SSE Hydro is really appeasing to the eye, but I feel this whole ident would have benefited from perhaps showing us more of the games themselves, or perhaps highlights from past ones. Whilst I'm sure many who were planning on tuning in were already going to, showing off a few exciting highlights wouldn't have necessarily been a bad thing. And to round off our special sporting idents, we move now to the Olympic Games for Rio 2016.
To go late in the build to our Through the Night coverage of the Olympics on BBC One. Back live to Rio 2016 and celebrations.
Not what I expected for the Olympics, to be quite honest. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, we see a CGI anteater pick up a hammer and begin to spin, as if he's competing in the hammer throw event. And he spins, and spins, and spins. Now, granted, it's neat that it forms the basis for the central circle, but by God does this make me dizzy. There's no kind of payoff, the Anteater is just left to endlessly spin, but I tell you what, if he ever did let that thing go, he'd definitely end up winning the gold medal easily. I don't have much else to say on this one, what I described is literally all there is, and what a shame in promoting an event such as the Olympics. Whether you feature footage from the games or not, something more engaging surely would have been the more appealing option when broadcasting the biggest sporting event on Earth. It surprises me as well that for the other 2 Olympic Games held within the Circles era, more traditional circle idents weren't used. For Beijing 2008, special animations were used to introduce programming, but seemed to lack any semblance of the Circles concept or the BBC One logo. Perhaps more surprising is the case for the 2012 Games, which were held in London. Now, there were some special idents created, but not necessarily under the Circles template. The BBC HD channel would broadcast highlights from each of the games in 3D, and yeah, this was the era where the industry was trying to make 3D in television a big deal, and suffice to say, it didn't happen. These sequences are impressive, but they lack the circle template, and I wouldn't be able to show them off properly with the 3D effect, so they won't be covered here. There were some other sequences that heralded the BBC as the Olympic broadcaster, but again, I'd argue that these are more promos than idents, as they lack the circles theming. But as the final part of our mega review today, let's get festive and take a look at the Christmas idents of the Circles era, and we'll start with the first one that debuted during the December of 2006. Now, doesn't this just put you in the mood? Christmas idents have been a long tradition on BBC One, harking all the way back to the late 1960s, and with every new ident refresh, a brand new sequence to mark the festive season hits our screens every single year. Well, almost every year. For 2006, the first year of the Circles, they've kept the concept simple, but featuring all the key bits of Christmas. Various residents are seen rolling about snowballs of different sizes, seeing them build and grow giant, the biggest snowball forming the festive circle in the final image. The key iconography of Christmas is such a big part of making an ident to meet the mood of the season. By featuring a snowball as your central concept, you meet that aim almost instantly. I love how it also represents a time of coming together, how making snowballs is never just for children, the grown-ups can get involved too. Everyone can join in to make something magical, which is the result we have here. This ident was seen during Christmas 2007 as well, but alongside a new original sequence, featuring penguins.
Now a double bill of fantastic films for Christmas afternoon here on BBC One. Go green with Shrek 2 at 20 to 5. But first, discover a whole new world beneath the waves in the network premiere of Finding Nemo.
Well, this takes me right back to that Christmas morning. The big day of 2007 I remember so well. The gifts I got, the things I watched on the telly, most of which was on BBC One. Our setting this time takes us out of the screens and onto the ice rink. One of my favourite places. But within all of the humans going for a skate, we have tons and tons of penguins who want to join in with the fun. And they don't need skates, they can slide on their bellies. But they do seem partial to a bit of ballet and an ice cold drink. Whether they can get it out though, that's another story. The final shot focuses on the centre of the rink, which has a Christmas tree made up of big red baubles as the focal point. This really is just all the best elements of Christmas coming together. Ice skating, a lovely tree, penguins, whilst not necessarily associated with the season, are creatures of the cold, so it makes sense. Plus, who doesn't love penguins, even CGI ones, getting up to all sorts of shenanigans? This ident proved so popular that a few months later in 2008, it was reintroduced as a regular sequence, albeit with any ties to Christmas, like the tree, removed. And whilst this does take away some of the magic from the original, it's always nice to see such a positive, playful and joyful ident have some sort of life beyond a certain time of year. And another thing that people love is the dynamic duo of Wallace and Gromit.
We're on BBC One. Hey, who turned out the lights? Gromit, where's me hat?
These two at Christmas? Perfect. This wasn't the first time Wallace and Gromit had been the central focus of a festive sequence, nor is it the first time we've discussed them. We've actually dedicated a whole episode of the ident review to Wallace and Gromit back in the day, so if you fancy seeing some more, check that video out. To briefly give my thoughts on this one again, It's just charm to a T. After Wallace fails to keep a grip on his sled, Gromit takes over, performing successful tricks and loops like he's Tony Hawk. This was created to help promote the then brand new Wallace and Gromit short, A Matter of Loaf and Death, which ultimately became one of the most viewed programmes of 2008. Whilst I'm sure many were aware and were going to tune in, I'd like to think this special ident helped somewhat in not only making people feel Christmassy, but in getting them excited to say hello to these wonderful characters once again. But how do you top Wallace and Gromit? Well, for Christmas 2009, BBC One would employ the services of arguably their most famous character. This is peak, and you know it is. Doctor Who was arguably at the peak of its revived popularity back in 2009, with David Tennant leading the charge as the 10th Doctor. With his final story due to be transmitted on Christmas Day and on New Year's Day 2010, it only seemed right that BBC One incorporated their most popular programme into their festive tradition. Again, I have covered this sequence before in a previous episode of the ident review, but like with Wallace and Gromit, I'll summarise here. The Doctor employs the help of a herd of reindeer to free the TARDIS from the snow, taking off into the sky and perfectly forming the circle against a gorgeously lit sky. It's a truly beautiful final image to rest on, and the inclusion of the Doctor and the TARDIS make it all the more fun. My only minor nitpick would be that whilst the music used sounds great, it would have been even better if some Doctor Who tunes could have been incorporated as well. Even just adapting the theme to the BBC One motif would have been a wonderful touch. I may be slightly biased as a Doctor Who fan, but come on, at Christmas time, it really doesn't get much better than this. So as the world entered a new decade, how would BBC One set the scene for 2010?
It's a sparkling Saturday night on BBC One with some especially sharp dance moves in high definition on BBC One HD.
A return to form, but a good one. After using characters, we return to a more traditional form of Christmas presentation, focusing on key iconography as well as a sense of coming together. We see some humorous examples of what can happen this time of year, frozen cars, nearly slipping on ice, but also the positives such as heading over the families for Christmas and also the use of Christmas lights. As the houses in this cul-de-sac all begin to illuminate, we head to an aerial shot, the houses nicely making up the circle for the sequence. An added little touch that I quite like is that the BBC One is illuminated as well, which really helps it blend in and feel like a proper part of the overall piece. The lights on the houses are predominantly red too, which not only is the main colour for BBC One, but conveniently happens to be one of the key colours associated with Christmas. The music for this works nicely too, being jolly and upbeat, with little sound effects here and there that instantly give it away as some kind of Christmas tune. So even though it's not tied into the big Christmas programme of that year, I like that when returning to something a bit more traditional, BBC One still went the extra mile to give us something heartwarming, eye-catching, and engaging to view during December. But for the following year, in 2011, things became a little more musical.
Consider yourself at home.
Consider yourself one of the family. We've taken to you so strong. It's clear we're going to get along. Consider yourself well in. Consider yourself part of the furniture. There isn't a lot to spare. Who cares whatever we got we share?
Consider yourself well in. Consider yourself part of the furniture.
There isn't a lot to spare. Who cares whatever we got we share? Some consideration we can stay. Consider yourself one of us.
make yourself right at home with BBC One this Christmas. Now, as the team fight to save their own lives, drama to take your breath away in Casualty.
Well, talk about extravagant. The first showing of this ident stands as one of the longest of any Christmas, at well over a minute. We see the various stars of the BBC come together to give us a rendition of Consider Yourself, originally from the musical Oliver. Now, not only can you spend this sequence playing Who's Who of stars on BBC One, but its charm once again comes from the sense of fun, family and togetherness during Christmas time. Whether that's playing games, singing songs, eating sweets and chocolate, all of those and more are seen as quintessential parts of the holiday season. And in a world of drastically increasing competition on television, BBC One more than ever wants you to become part of the family. The final image of the stars surrounded by a circle of carol singers is quite a nice finale, but it's sadly blurred out as the BBC One logo comes in and snowflakes fall around it. Some may like it, but I find the blur just totally ruins the image completely, dampening the impact as a whole. There were of course shorter versions of the ident, with the final shot being of the dinner table, adorned with everything Christmassy you could want. This is definitely a much better shot to end on, though I get that it doesn't summarise the build-up with the song. Ultimately though, not a bad way to bring your stars together. But there was also one extra variant that preceded a special programme for children.
Trapped in a burning hospital. They're preparing for the worst on Casualty in 45 minutes. Before that on BBC One, a little earlier than billed, plans for a takeover of Camelot.
Can't beat a bit of the Gruffalo. Based on the book by Julia Donaldson, the Gruffalo's child was animated just as the original story was, both now becoming staples for children's Christmas TV viewing. We see father and child sliding down the snow, having the time of their lives, soaring through the air before crashing through a pile of snow, leaving a nice round circle behind for the BBC One logo to inhabit. It's fun and puts a smile on your face for sure, again invoking that sense of joy around the holiday season. It's a cute touch to see the Gruffalo and their child embracing next to the logo too, a reminder to keep our loved ones close and share our gratitude for them every year. It still uses the Consider Yourself instrumental, which I suppose makes sense as it was the main theme for the year, but why not take some music from the animation? Again, the recycling of soundtracks isn't always to my taste, but the instrumental is joyous enough that it still works here to some extent. For next year's Christmas, 2012 had been quite the year for the UK, so BBC One was more than ready for showtime.
What a spectacular year it's been for sport, and now on BBC One, the eagerly awaited celebration of its stars.
I predict a riot of festive laughter now on BBC One and BBC One HD, with some strong language and adult humour. Mammy has got planned the mother of all nativity plays.
Talk about a basic approach. With the theme being showtime, having a traditional red theatre curtain drop down and form your background does work a treat. However, beyond that, we are treated to various gold sparkles, taking various forms such as a Christmas tree, snowflakes and even fireworks. Whilst these features are recognisably Christmassy, I can't help but feel that these are very lacklustre for festive idents, especially when compared to what else we've had in the Circles era. There were some other variants that popped up, featuring animated characters whose movies were showing on BBC One that year. These include Shrek, Prince Naveen and Russell from Up. They're sweet enough, but beyond a few slices of animation, there's nothing much else to say on them. The background and general framing remains exactly the same, but if you're disheartened at this like I am, don't you worry, for our friends in Northern Ireland cooked up something special for us this year.
Mordred's forced to make a choice and aware of the consequences on Camelot, Merlin at 8:15. And for Saturday night now on BBC One Northern Ireland, a super sparkly semi-final of Strictly.
Now that's what I call Christmas. It's not much when you break it all down, but I'd argue that this Northern Ireland exclusive does far more in getting you into the Christmas spirit than any of the variants seen on the rest of BBC One during 2012. We see people playing in the snow, building snowmen before settling on a glittery red bauble. It's one of the most essential and iconic slices of Christmas, which makes it ripe for the picking to be represented by a festive ident. It doesn't do anything to necessarily break new ground or knock your socks off, but it at the very least looks and feels like Christmas, far more than the showtime sequence. So if 2012 came across a little disappointing, we all hope that 2013 would be a wonderful Christmas indeed.
we all knew Tom could sing, but Hugh playing the piano, now that's a gift. The decorations are up on BBC One, so we can officially say we're merrily on the way to the prospect of having a wonderful Christmas. The series finale of The Paradise is tomorrow night at 8 on BBC One. Will it be Happy Ever After for Moray and Denise? We're all the richer for having Chris Evans here with the National Lottery live in 50 minutes. First, Fletcher's in the doghouse, and he's not alone.
Seasonal inspiration from James Martin's Christmas Kitchen in 45 minutes. Then Flog It celebrates Agatha Christie at 4:30. But now on BBC One, Aled Jones follows in Roman footsteps.
Sparkle at 5 after our big Christmas afternoon film, and it's a cracker. This is the highest grossing animated movie ever. On BBC One, the premiere of Toy Story 3.
Traditional and yet modern. When I say traditional, I mean that the design choice BBC One has gone for is wrapping paper. We see ribbons somewhere on the screen during each of them, and several variants did arrive this year, all with a different pattern. We have robins who come alive to sing and doff their top hats at you, golden angels sat by a tree, some placing the star on top whilst others gaze idly on. We have a set of reindeers, some doing their own thing solo, whilst the two at the top meet and share a nose touch, I guess? We have snowflakes also, though I'd rather the one at the start in the middle of the screen stick around rather than disappear into the BBC One logo, the others not really making much of an impact at all. A fifth variant later appeared, replacing robins with various Toy Story characters in little golden dots. This was due to the fact that BBC One was showing the trilogy of Toy Story films over Christmas, with Toy Story 3 receiving its network TV premiere on Christmas Day 2013. Whilst these wrapping paper idents have some charm to them, like with 2012, it feels a little lackluster compared to many of the festive sequences we've seen. Whether it was the character-driven ones of 2008 and 9, or the more simplistic ones from the early days of the Circles era, they all felt very Christmassy at their core, and whilst these do evoke the imagery of Christmas, there's little excitement holding me here as a viewer. As we head into 2014, we can only hope this very lackluster approach didn't go for a hat-trick. Thankfully, they came up with something better. Magical. Quite magical. Done away with are the red backgrounds of show curtains and wrapping paper, swapped in for the most important piece of festive iconography, Christmas trees. In a snow-laden forest, we see various people decorating some rather special trees, as 3 different variants were produced, aiming at highlighting some of that year's biggest programming on BBC One. There's one for the Great British Bake Off, when it still aired on the BBC, where we see some bakers putting the finishing touches on what looks like a rather tasty tree. Another highlight, Strictly Come Dancing. This tree is made up of shiny glitter balls, with a red one on top acting as the star, with a fairy dancer to boot. But my favourite, unsurprisingly, is the TARDIS blue coloured tree, adorned with lights and police boxes, and mysteriously dematerialises away, with a person wearing a rather familiar scarf nearby. All variants finish on this lovely cluster of trees, which act as a pseudo-circle. And even though this takes place in the evening, the bright lights of the various trees puts that warm fuzzy feeling right into you. The soundtrack as well is a gorgeous rendition of To Love Somebody, a classic song originally written and released by the Bee Gees way before their disco days. All in all, these serve as truly wonderful Christmas idents. They have all the hallmarks of the season, and they do BBC One proud. Definitely one of the best of the 2010s, that's for sure. For the following year in 2015, we'd see a return to a story-based ident for Christmas. The story of Sprout Boy.
Welcome to Christmas and welcome to Little Sprout Boy on BBC One. The lights are on. We're all about giving, and there's a lot to love this Christmas. Here's a taster of things to come. We're feeling really festive now on BBC One. Lots of exciting things to look forward to and plenty of sparkle now we've officially switched on to Christmas. But not everyone's in high spirits in EastEnders. So, the sinister campaign against the residents intensifies and Smitty reveals a big secret tonight. Pure drama with Capital in an hour on BBC One. After Holby City.
I'll confess, I'm no fan of Sprouts. However, I am a fan of Sprout Boy. This character would be the star of Christmas on BBC One this year, with a lavish 1 minute long promo showcasing how he isn't the most well loved of Christmas vegetables. The promo is voiced by 12th Doctor Peter Capaldi, who together with a bunch of BBC stars invites Sprout Boy to celebrate Christmas with them, honing in that sense of acceptance or togetherness once more during the festive period. The idents themselves feature Sprout Boy doing a variety of Christmassy things. One example is writing labels for Christmas gifts, which if you look closely, you'll see that Sprout Boy is writing to none other than the Doctor. However, in doing so, he loses his balance and falls on a ribbon bow, which duly sticks to his back, forming the basis of the circle and BBC One logo, in blazing red, of course. Another example sees the vegetable having a go at a Christmas cracker, and despite not winning, a trinket ring falls onto his head, perfectly fitting him and acting more as a crown than anything else. Very cute. The third variant sees Sprout Boy at the head of the dining table, joined by the CGI-rendered BBC stars from the full promo. These include Claudia and Tess from Strictly, will.i.am from The Voice, Doc Cotton from EastEnders, Sherlock and Watson, Luther, Mary Berry from Bake Off, and Graham Norton, now with beard. Not only is it great to see these stars in animated form, but it just sums up the joy behind the Sprout Boy story. Despite all of the struggles and adversities he may have faced, he ultimately was able to find somewhere, a family of his own, to celebrate Christmas. There were a few more idents that popped up this year, though they don't feature Sprout Boy as the central focus. One is a beautiful nightscape adorned with lanterns, which as an image I definitely wouldn't mind framing up on my wall. The other is a city view, again taken from the winter months, but this variant only aired in Northern Ireland. So for Christmas 2016, how on earth would you top Sprout Boy?
Wait till you see what I've got for you. Look at that! That's not bad, is it? Ready? Wait for it. Boom! Illuminations! Not bad, is it?
Settling in for Sunday night drama and a family get-together that's not without friction here on BBC One, a glamorous visitor to Moy Beg stirs up passions. My mother and Unges.
On this fourth Sunday in Advent, Songs of Praise as festive favourites you can sing along with at 4:40. But first here on BBC One Northern Ireland, a feast of movie and show tunes for you as we look back on Proms in the Park 2016.
At 10 o'clock, the news here on BBC One with Michelle Hussein.
A simple, yet satisfying finale. Rather than story or character-driven idents, we're back to featuring several variants, all showing some kind of key Christmassy object. It's a tried and trusted method at this point, but it's relatable enough and works well. We see someone showing off their brand new Christmas jumper, and gaudy as it is, it does light up, which is pretty nifty. But beyond serving as the circle for the BBC One logo, I wouldn't be wearing that jumper much. Another variant shows us in a family home, that point on Christmas Day where everyone has had dinner, watching TV, but some members of the family are so knackered that they just fall asleep on the sofa, party hat and all. If you look on the telly, even though it's out of focus, you can definitely tell this family are watching BBC One. And as humorous as it is that this poor geezer's head is the focal point for an ident, at least that vibe of falling asleep on the big day is entirely relatable. Rewinding back to Christmas dinner, our third variant this year has a Christmas pudding as the basis for the circle, with family members eagerly watching on, hoping that those matches will eventually light up. It's probably my least favourite from this year, but it feels Christmassy, and again, is entirely relatable to many kinds of audiences. The final regular variant to be broadcast for Christmas 2016 is short and sweet, focusing on a red bauble on a Christmas tree, similar to what BBC One Northern Ireland did a few years back. It summarises the vibe and energy I get from these sequences, simple, yet to the point. It's Christmas time, and what better way to encompass that spirit and promise by showing relatable moments from the holidays. On Christmas Day itself, new idents were shown before many of the day's biggest programmes, all of which showing different groups of people introducing said different shows. There are several of these, but to show an example, here's one promoting Doctor Who, featuring friend of the channel, Dominic G. Martyn.
It's Doctor Who, now on BBC One.
A nice idea to introduce the different shows, but notice that word in the middle? Oneness? Oh no. It started. before that new era fully kicks in, it's time to round up the Circles era once and for all. For any ident set to last a few years as a channel's central form of presentation is achievement enough. For a set to last for over a decade, now that shows that they held something truly special. When they first came about in late 2006, many appreciated the simple, yet often very engaging concepts that hit their TV screens in those first few months. The circle motif itself arguably represented both a callback and evolution of the globe idents of old, having a central and consistent focus point to every ident that came about in this era. As the years went on and more idents cropped up, both for regular broadcast and for special occasions, the circle's concept found room to expand and evolve too. The more simple structures often remained, but the designers found many new ways to promote either specific programs, create a certain mood or atmosphere, or just find a way to engage viewers and entice them into whatever BBC One had on offer. For millions of viewers, the circles are instantly recognisable, and even to this day, coming close to a decade since they were withdrawn, many still see them as the de facto BBC One look. As 2017 rolled in, the hippos swam away, to allow a brand new era in BBC One presentation to take the reins. And so, we bid farewell to the Circle's idents. For 10 years they kept us entertained, engaged and enthralled to BBC One. Whilst not every sequence was a home run, plenty of them have gone on to be fondly remembered and recalled, and probably will be for several years and decades to come. Cheers to the Circles, their impact for BBC One presentation, and their lasting legacy in the wide world of television idents. During the Christmas of 2016, the BBC began to expand the One name to spell out oneness, whatever that actually meant. It would show up here and there throughout the season, but I think we all know that there is no way that that'll show up again. Certainly not as part of a brand new ident refresh, right? Right? Well, on New Year's Day 2017, after more than 10 years in use, the Circle's package of idents were finally retired. Now to replace them would have to be something pretty momentous, something that would capture that same charm that they had achieved so easily. What we actually got was this. A bunch of swimmers all stopping to stare at the camera whilst the oneness banner plays out at the bottom. No music, no dialogue from them, just awkward stares and not much else. This was oneness, and it set the template for what audiences would see on BBC One over the next few years.
BBC One in 2017, bringing us together for more amazing moments. From me, Dean Lydiot, and all of us here, a very happy new year to you. Hope you like our exciting new look of oneness for the new year.
The idents were a joint venture between BBC Creative, an in-house team, and the renowned photographer Martyn Parr. Martyn was most famous for a series of photos depicting life across the country, from different areas, different classes, often presenting a rather intimate look at modern life. A popular photographer helming the new look of BBC One? That seems like a good idea. But when the sequences rolled out, how did the audience take to the idea of oneness? Pretty soon after they were first introduced, the backlash was instant. There was always going to be resistance to swapping out the circles. I mean, any ident package that lasts for 10 years, that's always going to be heavily missed and noticed when change does come. But why was the backlash to oneness and the idents it carried so severe? Well, for that, let's go back and take a quick look at the various BBC One identities from years past, all of which have their detractors, but overall have a positive view from many viewers. The batwings were heavily criticised upon their introduction back in 1953, and their positive reputation came many years after it ceased to be used. It symbolises the old school BBC, and is still used extensively when referring to the corporation's early period. The globe motifs, in use in their various forms since the 60s, all the way up until the late 90s, are some of the most recognisable branding that BBC One has ever had. Whilst many of them are very simplistic in their design and presentation, that iconic image of the revolving globe became synonymous with the BBC as a whole, and not just here in Britain, but ironically, across the world. The BBC One balloon too faced its own set of backlash when it was first introduced in 1997. Naturally, audiences resist such great change to begin with, but once again, as time went on, people warmed to the calming balloon as it soared across various locations all over the UK. Nearly 30 years on from its debut, some believe it to be one of the greatest ident sets ever for BBC One. The closest comparisons, and indeed similarities to oneness, come from the rhythm and movement set, used from 2002 until 2006. When these first came out, audiences by and large were not happy. Whilst the balloon had taken some time to adjust to, it at least was some visual link to BBC One's past, as the balloon itself had the familiar globe patterning all over it. The rhythm and movement idents, however, had absolutely no link to the channel's past. Instead, we saw groups of people engaging in various activities. Audiences were perplexed, though the BBC insisted this style of ident showcased different kinds of people doing different kinds of things, reflecting one of the BBC's core ideals of trying to appeal to everyone. A foolhardy objective, some would say, but a valiant one nonetheless. Oneness in many ways embodies the same ethos that rhythm and movement was going for, different groups of people doing different types of things. So, whereas rhythm and movement has gained some reappraisal over the last 20 years, why has the same not happened for oneness, given it's nearly a decade old? Well, for me, the key difference is that with rhythm and movement, the action doesn't necessarily stop. Whatever activity you're watching these people do, they keep it going for as long as the ident plays. There are some where they may be looking directly in the camera at you, but they don't suddenly stop everything to stare you out unnervingly. Oneness in many cases does the exact opposite. There are exceptions to the rule, of course, but a lot of these sequences just feel underwhelming, especially for late 2010s television. There are some positives to oneness. It is nice to see people from all over the UK once again tying into the BBC's ethos to appeal to all. Had it been introduced in, say, the 70s or 80s, for example, a time before the internet, a time where if you wanted to watch your favourite shows, you had to sit down and watch them at the certain time they were on, not at your own leisure. In that sort of world, oneness would have felt a lot more appropriate and apt of a slogan to push. But in the late 2010s, I don't know, for me it just rang very, very hollow. More idents would follow throughout 2017, 2018 and 2019, all of them continuing to promote oneness in a similar style. However, oneness's finest hour, in my book at least, came about when the world would be hit with an unexpected event on an unprecedented scale.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
The pandemic shook the world. That's undeniable. A lot of fear circulated, and in an attempt to help quell some of it, and to advise people to stay at home as per the guidance, the BBC would adopt oneness to mean something altogether different.
At 6, the BBC News now on BBC One with Rita Chakrabarti.
This batch of idents reflected the socially distanced world we all found ourselves living in. But really, I feel that they had a bigger purpose than oneness ever had originally. And showing audiences what they could do from the comfort of their own homes was both inspiring and calming, taking the edge off an increasingly frightful situation. These variants would stay in use for quite some time, and are now inextricably linked to the time of the pandemic, surreal as it was. But for what they represented, they were a surprising fulfillment of what the oneness brand was striving to get across. In 2021, more traditional oneness sequences would return to viewers' screens, albeit with the brand new BBC corporate logo and font branding for the channels. During this reintroduction, the oneness tagline was noticeably absent. This would be the beginning of the end for the concept. The wording itself was now gone, yet the idents remained, showing off more groups of people doing all sorts of things, many of them staring you down the camera in a rather unnatural, awkward manner. There were no great improvements to the concept or the idea, and if there was no big refresh after the pandemic era, people began to wonder how long these idents would last. So, after 5 years of oneness, why was it such a disaster? I want to stress that the overall idea and concept of oneness is a sweet one, and one I can get behind. But the execution of the idea just felt really, really poor. Getting different groups of people doing different things together is absolutely fine, but give it some life. Make it interesting. Let it captivate the viewer in a way that'll engage them, not make them want to turn away due to prolonged eye contact. For me, the rhythm and movement ident struck that balance really effectively during the early 2000s. But for oneness, whilst it had glimmers of achieving its potential in poignant and in some cases very touching ways, the idea just didn't have the power or impact required to truly stand out as one of the greats when it comes to BBC One presentation. So much so that when the lens set was introduced in 2022, I didn't hear a general outcry for the loss of oneness, not in the same way people did for the circles, or any other previous set in fact. Will we see oneness make a grand return in the future? I doubt it. The idea would have worked better in the bygone days of analog telly, and what we did get resulted in some sweet scenes, but nothing overtly memorable or lasting in our ever faster moving televisual world. Rest peacefully, oneness. You gave it a damn good go, but by and large I don't think you're going to be missed. But who will be missed is Martyn Parr. One of the main forces behind the oneness era recently passed away in the December of 2025. His work in photography continues to intrigue, to inspire, and capture the imaginations of many people today. He was 73 years old. After 5 years of rocking the oneness look, BBC One finally debuted its new main look at the beginning of April 2022. The oneness idents, whilst a concept I could get behind, didn't exactly play out the best in execution. Whilst seeing different groups of people together was nice, I feel it didn't really say much beyond that, resulting in a rather bland set overall. However, this new batch, dubbed the lens idents, have attempted to rectify that. Have they measured up to the challenge? Let's find out. We won't be taking a look at every single iteration that's come so far, but I've chosen a good batch that I feel are the most interesting to talk about, positively or negatively. So let's start with one that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, Trampoline.
Bob Mortimer with one of the funniest stories yet, but is it true? Would I lie to you? The unseen bits from the last series in half an hour here on BBC One.
I miss having a good bounce around. A scene of people trampolining gracefully conjures up an instantly soothing atmosphere, and when the lens motif itself cuts in, that's when it gets more interesting. We quickly see a group meeting and preparations for a disco happening, all presumably taking place within the same hall of the trampolines. I love the sense of different layers within a setting, and the idea itself makes a natural fit for a television ident. My main complaint here, and one that will undoubtedly extend throughout the other variants, is that I wish we had a few more seconds looking at the different layers that the lens showcases. It feels like they're ever so brief. But as it stands, not a bad start for BBC One's new look. Let's see if we can carry on the positives at the skate park.
I Got News For You is back later at 9. Welcome to Friday night on BBC One.
Interesting viewpoint this time. The skate park setting itself is really aesthetically pleasing to the eye. The orange lights in the background contrast really nice with the lighter tones seen elsewhere, and similar to watching people on trampolines, watching people skate around is a soothing and calming viewing experience. When the lens cuts in this time, we see a snapshot to people dancing at a club or a rave, and then a portrait, presumably in an artist's gallery. Whereas the first sequence we looked at arguably took place within the same space, I'm not so sure about this one. I mean, sure, at different points in time you could have raves at old skate parks and maybe even a gallery decades or centuries ago, but it feels less clear this time as to whether that's the case. Regardless, the layers within the lens are interesting and catch the eye, managing to look different to the skate park setting, yet come across naturally rather than feeling forced. One thing I should probably touch on is the soundtrack. Whilst we can faintly hear some music in the background, most of the soundscape is taken up by the skateboarders. I'm all for boarding, but I think I prefer a proper musical soundtrack to this one, though there are plenty of idents where a more natural soundscape does work a treat. I'd say that's 2 for 2 so far. Let's now see if we can get a hat trick as we go camping.
This week's top 4 cook for last year's finalists, a place in the semi-finals at stake in MasterChef in half an hour. First on BBC One, New Truths, New Lies.
Now I really enjoy this one. Camping has never been something I've overtly fell in love with, but I don't mind it from time to time. This setting instantly brings up all the positive aspects of the activity for me. Setting up your tent in some random field, the warm light from your lamps illuminating the night, various other campers going about their business, it's got a great community feel to it. This alone I feel gets across the idea of community far better than many of the oneness idents ever could. The lens aspect here shows us different layers from the same setting, focusing on different times of day or year. Seeing the contrast between the main night setting with the bright day and murkier afternoons is a brilliant touch, though once more I wish they'd spent a few more seconds letting it play out. I've got to say as well that the colour scheme in this setting is absolutely gorgeous. The warm glow of the various tents, the colours they give off standing out against the night sky, it's such pleasing imagery and yet so simple, an idea I wish we could see more of on the telly. My only other little gripe would again be the soundtrack. I can hear the music there when I listen closely, but again, with the Skateboarders variant, it's drowned out by the natural sounds going on. And this is just my view, but I think one or the other would have worked just as well rather than a half and half mishmash approach. Definitely my favourite of the lens idents so far, but after a night's camping, we'll take a trip to the market.
Yes, looking forward to the new series, just half an hour away here on BBC One. Before that, let's cook.
A nice little concept here. Market imagery is ripe for the picking when it comes to TV idents. There's so much potential as to what you could showcase. We see a bright sunny day at the market as the main focus, before the lens cuts in, showing us the quietness of the early morning and someone sweeping up after a busy day. All everyday sights and concepts that we're familiar with and can relate to in some way. This may sound like a corny idea, but I feel the BBC could have incorporated one of their signature programmes here, maybe showing off the market stalls and EastEnders. Just think about it, imagine seeing this populated with the various characters seen in the show, with extra ones popping up as the lens cuts in. I'd argue that could work really well, and I'm not even a fan of EastEnders. Regardless of my wild ideas, I'm still quite happy with what we get here. It's arguably not as standout as the skate park or camping variants, it's pleasant enough that it shoots across that warm feeling, providing you with a landscape that is somewhat recognisable. But as the night draws in, we've got preparations to make for the disco.
Bet you've done it. Send a rude text to the wrong person. Lee's desperately trying to limit the damage, not going out in half an hour. With some strong language, the headlines. First on BBC One, they're back.
Oh, I see what's going on here. Eagle-eyed viewers among you will recognise this setting from the trampolining ident. It briefly appeared as one of the layers brought in with the lens, and this time it seems that's all flipped around. We see people preparing for a disco, with the ball being pulled up to the ceiling, amongst light fixtures all communicating a great sense of fun and excitement that a party like this often brings. As the lens cuts in, we see the other two scenarios seen within this building, that being the group meeting and the trampolines that we looked at earlier. Whilst on one hand I see this as a clever way of tying different variants of the set together, there is a part of me that's slightly disappointed. With a brand new set of idents designed to reinvigorate and redefine the look of the BBC's flagship channel, I would assume that each one would be designed and displayed uniquely, each one giving its own individual flair. It's a minor nitpick for sure. As I said, I think tying different sequences together is a novel idea, but I think I would prefer completely unique idents a lot more. Having said that, the setting for this continues to carry across the warm, welcoming feel that many of these variants have done so well, and if this is the sort of approach BBC One wishes to take with the new look, then I'm here for it. But from the comfy fun of a disco, let's go now to a rave.
Mel Gibson in the Oscar-winning Braveheart tonight at 10:35. But right now on BBC One, with some adult humour, you know how it is. You push the send button and wish you hadn't.
More recycling again. This rave sequence was of course seen within the lens during the skate park sequence, which itself pops up here as a layer, and the art gallery view also returns to the fray. Positives first, I like the music we can subtly hear in the background, but I wish that to truly capture that feeling of being at a rave or a club-like environment, I just wish it had been fuller, louder, the dominant audio factor, if you will. That would have really helped cement the vibe of the ident for me. But again, the more recycling of clips I'm seeing, the less enchanted by the set I feel as a whole. It's not the worst idea in the world, but there are infinitely more possibilities that you could have shown within the lens here than just clips from other sequences. One thing I've failed to mention so far about the lens itself is that some have likened it to the old globe motif, which was seen and used on BBC One from the 1960s up until the early 21st century. I see where that view comes from, but I'd argue it reminds me more of the circle set, seen on screens from 2006 to 2016. A central circle-like object I think remains a strong bit of iconography for BBC One as a channel, and yet it doesn't feel too intrusive in the overall sequence, despite literally cutting into the screen. But for the rave sequence individually, a nice idea, but one hampered by recycling of clips and subdued music. Big missed potential here in my view. After partying hard, however, on our way home we've got to take a sit down on the park bench.
The news at 10 o'clock now on BBC One with Clive Myrie.
Now, this is a return to form. The sight of a park bench sat against the vast view of the night sky and the streets below is one that, even when simply described, really whets the appetite visually. And I think it's fair to say that this one doesn't disappoint. The main image is gorgeous enough, but when the lens appears, revealing further layers in the setting, it just adds to the whole thing even more. We see a family on a bright day, two friends chatting as the evening rolls in, before returning to focus on the solitary park bench against the night sky. Great see-new footage in this one, and I just can't get over how lovely it is on the whole. So incredibly simple, but we've often learned here on this show that sometimes the simplest of idents can have the greatest of impacts. This is honestly battling with camping for being my favourite of the lens set so far, but I think camping just wins out for me. But now for our final ident today, we're sticking around to gaze upon the night sky.
Winner of no less than 5 Oscars, including one for its director and star now on BBC One. Some strong language, graphic violent scenes, and scenes of sexual violence in Braveheart.
A bit derivative, but nice nonetheless. The image here is quite literally the night sky. You can see smatterings of life below, but not as clearly as we could in the park bench variant. The lens cuts in showcasing different times of day against the landscape, pretty much what we saw in park bench, just without any people. Only a couple of birds flying through. I honestly don't have a great deal to say on this one. It's a lovely image for sure, but it lacks a lot of the punch or substance or detail that many other variants in the set have had in abundance. You could have stared on the ground before panning up into the air, you could have shown different things flying through the sky like airplanes, or even a globe pattern balloon if you wanted a cheeky nod to BBC One's past, particularly as the corporation is celebrating 100 years in 2022. Ultimately, it's perfectly harmless, but definitely one of the weaker idents amongst the whole lens set that we've looked at today. To round off then, does the lens brand completely redeem BBC One's visual presentation? It's not perfect, but I'd argue it does a lot of things right, and fixes a lot of the misfires seen with Oneness. Most of the idents we've seen here perfectly encapsulate a warm, soothing, welcoming environment, whilst also containing enough visual substance to keep sequences interesting and appealing to the viewing eye. The use of recycled content and musical soundtracks not being at the forefront are complaints I personally have, but even after just a couple of months, I can confidently say I would take the lens idents over anything churned out by Oneness in a heartbeat. Whether it's the different settings or the multiple layers showcased, one thing feels certain to me. This looks and feels like BBC One, continuing the channel's strong visual appeal that it has frequently showcased over the last several decades. So here's to the lens idents. May they have a long and fruitful life on the channel, and I can't wait to see what new variants will be shown on our TV screens in the future. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Liam Domain, AJ Mac 200017, Jen, Traffy, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Tim Ripley, 40-something Manchild, Mr. J McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Shadowfiend 180X, Adam Gamer, Sir Fonzie Daz, Matthew Elliff, Pigeon's House, Seraphit Euphoria, Dave Batten, Kevin Mallon, Liam Turner, Real Team Foxy Plays, Jenny T, Lovely Dave and Gem, NJ on DT84, Jimmy the Bantam, The Macabre Tavern, Haruka Hineno, Robert Wallace, Paul Harper, Michael Kennedy, and Paul Conway, our AMTV staff members.